Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep. Welcome to the second session on internal security. Yesterday we had the first class on internal security, and to just refresh your memory, we covered the syllabus for internal security. We also covered few basic introductory concepts such as extremism. We understood what is left-wing and right-wing ideology, and we even studied the conflict zones of India. Then we covered the linkages between development and spread of extremism. We understood how the lack of development can contribute to the spread of extremism. We took specific examples in the context of left wing extremism that has been witnessed in India. We studied about Maoism. We understood what is the Maoist ideology that took root in China, which eventually had an impact on India as well. We studied the birth of the Naxal movement in India. We studied the rise of Naxalism in India in this context, and this is where I had stopped yesterday's discussion. So today, I'm going to continue the discussion from here. We will just summarize the causes for the spread of left wing extremism in India. We have studied this yesterday itself, but I have categorized the points under separate groups so that even if there is a mains question on this topic, you guys should be able to easily write an answer to that question. So let's take a look at this, and then we will study the evolution and spread of Naxalism in India. We'll also look at the current status of Naxalism, and then we'll talk about India's response towards Naxalism, how India has countered the Maoist movement in the country. So talking about the causes, we studied yesterday that the movement broke out in Naxalbari in 1967. And the initial birth of the movement was largely related to land related factors. In the feudal society of West Bengal, the landlord system, the zamindari system, which had a huge impact on the peasants, the landless laborers, and farmers, it had created a big social divide. So the Maoists exploited this divide, and the failure in implementing land reforms led to resentment amongst the locals who resented the Indian state. So, under the influence of these Maoists, the peasants at Naxalbari, they took up violence and targeted the zamindars, the local authorities, and the police, which triggered the Naxal movement in India. So, land-related factors has been one of the biggest contributing factor for the rise and spread of Naxalism in the country. Once the movement broke out in Naxalbari, it quickly spread to other areas as well, wherever such land-related issues existed. Because in many places, the land sealing laws had been violated. The existing land tenures were violated, which would favor the landlords. These landlords would have a corrupt nexus with the government authorities, the local authorities, the local police, and even the politicians. They would all be working with these upper caste landlords, which would create an enormous disadvantage to the peasants, farmers, and landless laborers. Along with this, the encroachment of land by government agencies for large public projects, infrastructure projects, mining projects. When government would acquire land, people would be displaced. They would lose their livelihood because land is everything for farmers, peasants, and the laborers. So land became one of the core issues. That's why even if you look at the Naxal movement in India, they have this motto. They mainly fight for water, land, and resources. The fight of Naxalism against the Indian state is primarily centered around these themes, and land is one of the most important themes which has driven Naxalism in the country. In today's Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, in Odisha, in parts of Maharashtra, in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, parts of Madhya Pradesh, in all these parts of central and eastern India, land was the primary root cause that triggered the rise of Naxal movement and contributed to the spread of Naxalism across several districts and villages. Apart from land, displacement and forced eviction became another major contributing factor. In fact, both are related to each other. When farmers or tribals or even peasants, when they lose land, they are eventually displaced, and usually their land is forcefully taken over by the state or sometimes even by private industries. So when large industries would get mining licenses, or if they get licenses for opening big factories and industries, they would take over these lands without paying adequate compensation to the local community. The various environmental laws that I mentioned yesterday, it had a big impact on the forest dwelling communities of India. The indigenous tribal communities which had resided in the forest, dwelled in the forest for centuries, they were displaced and forcefully evicted in order to protect the environment and biodiversity. But in the process, even though the intention was good, the tribal communities would lose their land. It would affect their livelihood, leading to their permanent displacement. And the worst part was they wouldn't get appropriate compensation or rehabilitation. If you look at 1950s and 1960s, India took up many large public projects. The dam projects especially would result in large-scale displacement of the local communities. And believe it or not, several families even today are fighting for adequate compensation. If you look at the Bakra Nangal project, for example, the Hirakud Dam, these were major projects that were built in that period. Even today, there are several victims who are still fighting for compensation and rehabilitation. So that highlights the inefficiencies in our governance. It highlights the failed governance and administration that created this divide between the Indian state and the local communities. It is this gap that would be exploited by extremists like Maoists. The Maoist elements would step in and they would easily act upon this resentment. They would leverage the resentment that locals had against the state and they would further brainwash them. They would indoctrinate them by saying that the state does not care about you. The state is depriving you of your rights. So by radicalizing them, they would get their support to trigger this large-scale movement against the Indian state. The livelihood-related causes was also a major contributing factor. The lack of jobs, the lack of opportunities, the failure to implement the welfare schemes and programs, and in general, the social exclusion of the lower and weaker classes in the country. The social exclusion of Dalits, tribal communities, and lower classes would obviously contribute to resentment against the society, the state, and the constitution. Because that is exactly what independent India had promised. That is exactly what the Constitution of India had promised. That untouchability will be abolished. Everybody will be treated equally. And those who are backward will get reservation, will get benefits. It was based on this promise that the idea of India had been created. But the failure in administration and governance over a period of 30 to 40 years is what contributed to the widespread rise of Naxal movement against the Indian state. So you cannot ignore the fact that Naxal movement in India is indeed rooted in few genuine root causes. This is not just a security problem. Of course, any extremist movement is a security problem. But apart from being a security problem, this is an administrative problem as well. Is that clear? Naxal movement in India even though we reject the ideology, we reject the violence of Maoists, we cannot reject the genuine root causes that exist. Without acknowledging the genuine root causes and the injustice which has been done to farmers, tribals, peasants, etc., you can never solve this problem. Understood? So it's very, very important to pay attention to the root causes, the factors that have contributed to the rise and spread of Naxalism. The governance related issues, especially corruption, the criminalization of Indian politics, the lack of welfare for the local people. They wouldn't see any benefits arising out of the Indian state. When I say Indian state, I'm referring not just to the central government, I'm referring to state governments and local authorities as well. And upon that, they would be abused as well, especially by the local police. These people would face a lot of abuses. They would be tortured, they would be charged under false cases at the behest of landlords and politicians. So, all these injustices that happened is what primarily contributed to the rise and spread of Naxalism in India. That's why the movement was not just limited to some parts of West Bengal or Bihar or Odisha. It saw a country-wide spread. At least a good 33% of India's geographical area would come under Naxal influence by 1980s, 1990s. So clearly, Naxalism represented one of the biggest security threats for India. Now, if you look at the spread of Naxalism, if you evaluate how the movement evolved, how it spread over the decades, you will notice that there were two distinct Maoist movements that had taken root in India. In the initial years, when Maoism broke out in 1967 at Naxalbari, it was led by the Maoist Communist Center of India, the MCCI. This was one of the Maoist factions which started the Naxal movement, and it was centered around West Bengal and Bihar. This was one Maoist movement that was mainly centered around the feudal regions of West Bengal and Bihar. Primarily, it was the land-related causes which had contributed to the rise of Maoism in these areas. Later, in 1970s, another branch of Maoism took root. It was led by the PWG, the People's War Group, which was another Maoist outfit centered around the Andhra Pradesh Odisha belt. Here, the primary cause was related to tribal welfare, tribal displacement, issues of farmers, etc. So, in today's Chhattisgarh, then Odisha, in today's Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, also extending to parts of Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, the movement was primarily led by this group called PWG, the People's War Group. So, two different strands of Maoism had taken root initially. Is that clear? See, there can be multiple Maoist outfits. It's not mandatory that there will be only one Maoist group. There can be different Maoist outfits as well. There can be different left-wing extremist organizations. So there was one group called MCCI leading the movement in the West Bengal, UP, Bihar, Jharkhand region. And in the Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Chhattisgarh region, another group called PWG would lead the movement. So throughout this period, Maoism became the biggest threat for India. In 1970s, all the way till 1980s, 1990s. During these 2 to 3 decades, we saw the quick spread of Naxalism across several states, districts, and villages in the country. Understood? So as the movement spread, there was obviously a security response from the Indian state. the central government with the state governments. They deployed their armed police forces. They deployed their police forces and paramilitary organizations to deal with this security threat that was threatening the integrity and sovereignty of India. Because as we studied yesterday, the goal of these Maoists is to throw out the Indian state, to capture state power. So obviously, their movement is a threat to the integrity of the nation, the sovereignty of the nation. It's an act of war against the Indian state. So the central government with the state governments launched a security operation targeting the Naxal movement across these states. But this is where the approach was short-sighted. It was a short-sighted approach from the Indian side. Because I just told you that you cannot solve this problem without addressing the genuine root causes. When you're dealing with such an ideological movement that is rooted in genuine causes, you need to tackle the root causes as well along with your security approach. You need both. You need your security operations and the administrative approach. But the mistake that India did back in 80s and 90s was that the governments, they just saw this as a security problem. They did not acknowledge the genuine root causes. They did not acknowledge the failure of governance and administration. They saw Naxals as just extremists, mindless extremists, and decided that we could wipe out the movement just by using force. Of course, the security operations did see some success because obviously the state would any day have superior forces. So with the help of the center, the state police, they launched major anti-Naxal operations and they dealt a major blow to these Maoist outfits. In fact, Maoism declined as well in India by late 1990s. By late 1990s and early 2000, India saw some success against Naxalism. We saw a decline in the movement. Because due to these security operations, several top leaders of these Maoist groups had been eliminated. Many were killed, many were arrested, their funds were targeted. So the movement did see a major decline in the late 90s and early 2000. But as I told you, such movements don't end so easily. Remember, Mao Zedong, he called for a protracted war, a protracted people's war. Meaning the Maoists are prepared for a long-term fight. They know that there will be ups and downs in their movement. So such strong ideological movements cannot be defeated just with a security approach. We have a living example for that. Otherwise, back in 90s, we would have wiped out this movement. Naxalism wouldn't exist today. But even today, Naxalism is a major threat for India. It's because the movement saw a revival a few years later. Due to these security operations in the 70s and 80s, there was tremendous pressure on MCCI and PWG. Especially the PWG was almost wiped out by the Andhra Pradesh police. The Andhra Pradesh police, they adopted a very unique strategy to fight the Naxals, and they saw tremendous success in this fight. They launched major counterinsurgency operations. We call them COIN operations. COIN stands for counterinsurgency. Through these counterinsurgency operations, Indian police forces, they saw tremendous success against Naxalism, especially the Andhra Pradesh police. Because of their unique strategy, they almost wiped out the PWG. But within a few years, we saw a revival of this movement. It became a much more stronger movement. See, later when we discuss India's response, I will explain the strategy of Andhra Pradesh police. We'll understand how the Andhra police in 80s and 90s dealt a severe blow to the PWG. What was that unique approach that they followed? We'll discuss that later. But the point to understand here is that such a strong ideological movement cannot be defeated just with a security approach. Along with your counterinsurgency operations, you need the administrative approach. You need to tackle the root causes, provide for development, provide for better governance. You need to pull the masses, the people, away from this radical ideology. Without addressing that, if you just focus on security operations, that will never give you complete success. Even though we weakened the movement, we saw a decline in the movement and brought these groups under tremendous pressure, we could not wipe out the ideology. So that was a big learning lesson for India. Because after being weakened, these groups came together. They formed a strategic alliance. Remember, yesterday I explained the strategies, the tactics, and principles of Maoism, which was outlined by Mao Zedong himself. What did Mao Zedong call for? He called for an armed insurgency against the state. He called for a mass rebellion where the masses will unite, take up arms to rebel against the state, to throw the state out and capture state power. And along with that, Mao Zedong insisted that the Maoists should make use of the local terrain to their advantage. They should wage guerrilla war. They should use the jungle, the mountains to their advantage and carry out these ambush attacks, these surprise attacks against the forces. He called for liberating the areas to remove the administration and create a strong base area. He called for a strong organization structure. And along with that, he urged the Maoists to be ready to form strategic alliances with others if needed to achieve their goal. So Maoists will align with any entity or organization who will support their cause. So as the movement was weakening and declining in early 2000, these distinct branches of Maoism came together. In 2004, it's a very, very big event in India's independent history. In the year 2004, these two Maoist groups, which had been weakened, they came together and united. They formed a strategic alliance to establish a new Maoist outfit called the CPI Maoist. This is how the Communist Party of India Maoist was formed. Today, the Naxal movement in India is led by the CPI Maoist. So as these two forces united, they brought their cadres together. They shifted their base of operations as well. They mobilized more funds and arms and weapons, and they became a stronger entity. They re-emerged as a stronger entity, posing a significant threat to India. Because from 2004 till 2009, 2010, the Naxal attacks started increasing. They managed to extend their influence, and we saw a revival of the Naxal movement in the country. So this is what led India to designate CPI Maoist as a terrorist organization. Is that clear? So today CPI Maoist is a proscribed organization, meaning it is designated officially as a terrorist organization in the country. The Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the nodal ministry for internal security, it has the powers to designate any organization or even individuals as terrorists under this law, under the UAPA. Please write down this point, very important. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA. This is the primary anti-terror law of India. So under this law, any organization, any individual can be designated as terror organizations and terrorists by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, if you remember, I told you yesterday that Naxalism in India is primarily an insurgency. Technically speaking, if you look at this academically, if you look at the characteristics and traits of the Naxal movement, it's an insurgent movement. It's not exactly a terrorist movement. But however, the government of India has the authority to declare any extremist organization as a terrorist organization. I also mentioned yesterday that the definition of terrorism is very subjective. It changes from place to place, time to time. There is no universal definition for terrorism, right? So, with regard to UPSC exams and as citizens of India, we are guided by what the government of India is telling us. If the Indian government designates an organization as a terrorist organization, we will call that group as a terrorist organization. And these powers are provided under UAPA. Under this law, which is the primary anti-terror law of India, the Home Ministry, which is the nodal ministry for internal security, can notify any terrorist organization and any individual terrorist. The Indian government has labeled even Northeast insurgent groups as terrorist organizations. So Indian government treats insurgency as terrorism if the insurgency is posing a significant threat to our integrity, to our sovereignty. If these insurgents are engaging in mindless violence, killing civilians, killing our security forces, then the government has the right to label any such armed extremist organization as a terrorist organization. Understood? In the next chapter, tomorrow, we will study the differences between terrorism and insurgency. You'll get a better idea about what is terrorism, what is insurgency, and how they are different. But please also remember that insurgent groups, armed extremist groups, can be designated as terrorist groups by the government of India. So, for our exams and as responsible citizens of the country, we will call all these groups designated as terrorist groups under UAPA as terrorist organizations. Even though technically they are insurgent groups, academically they are insurgent outfits, with regard to our exams, we can call them terrorist organizations. So CPI Maoist, that was formed in 2004 with the merger of MCCI and PWG, has been designated as a terrorist outfit in India. Because the CPI Maoist has killed innocent civilians. It has carried out numerous attacks in the country. It has targeted our security forces, killed hundreds of our security forces. It has posed a threat to the integrity and sovereignty of the nation. So as a result, CPI Maoist can be labeled as a terrorist outfit as well. So when Naxalism was at its peak, it had spread to more than 17 states and union territories in the country. There was a point where nearly 33% of India was under some sort of Naxal influence. Out of the 600 odd districts that we had back then, almost 180 plus districts had come under Naxal influence. Is that clear? Now, I will be showing you few important maps and providing some very important analysis, and I want you guys to pay attention. You can see two maps that I've shared over here. This is from 2007, based on data from 2007. This is from 2017. It helps us understand the status of Naxalism in the country today. We will talk about the current status as well in 2023. All right. Now, if you look at 1970s, 1980s, more than 10 states in India had been affected. Back in 1970s, 1980s, more than 10 states had been affected. Naxal influence had easily spread to 100 plus districts, and Naxals had a strong hold in at least 40 to 50 districts back then. And in several villages and districts, they had even created so-called liberated zones, meaning they had largely removed the administration. They would prevent the authorities from conducting their work. They would target government buildings, government officials, and police officials. So in several villages and at least in few districts during 70s and 80s, they had created these so-called liberated zones. All right. But then we had managed to weaken the movement in 1980s, 1990s, and by early 2000, India managed to weaken Naxalism. Correct? So essentially, The two branches of Maoism that I was talking about, the MCCI, was mainly centered around this region here, around West Bengal, Bihar, parts of Uttar Pradesh, and today's Jharkhand, because Jharkhand was created much later. This is where the MCCI was largely present and it was influential. Then in this belt over here, it was the PWG that was leading the movement. Correct? In the Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh belt. Is that clear? So it was PWG that was leading the movement in this part of the country. So after India weakened the movement by 90s and early 2000, these groups, they merged in 2004 to form CPI Maoist. Along with forming this strategic alliance, they shifted their base of operations as well, because Indian security forces were targeting them from all the sides. The concerned state police, with the help of the center, along with our intelligence agencies, were exerting pressure on these groups from all the sides. So as a result, they got pushed more inwards. And today, the hub of Naxalism has shifted over here. Today, this is the hub of Naxalism in the last 15-20 years. Right? Since CPI Maoist was formed, their base of operations has shifted to this region. And which is this region? This is the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. They have shifted their base towards the Dandakaranya region, the dense forests of Chhattisgarh and Odisha. This is where the CPI Maoist is very, very active even today. Is that clear? The base has largely shifted to the Dantewad Bastar region, centered around the Chhattisgarh Odisha belt. This is where the CPI Maoist has largely shifted its operations to. Understood? Now please look at this map. I will show you some important locations where Naxalism is very active even today. You should be familiar with these districts and these places. Can you see Gadchiroli over here in Maharashtra? This part of Maharashtra, interior Maharashtra, it borders Telangana, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. This region is the Amravati belt, the Amravati region, the interior part of Maharashtra. And here, Naxalism is very active in Gadchiroli. Do you know what could be the reason for the presence of Naxalism here in Maharashtra? Any particular root cause that exists over here? If you're aware, please let me know in the comments. I'm talking specifically about Gadchiroli in Maharashtra, in the Amravati region. What factor could have contributed to the persistence of Naxalism here? Only few students are getting it right. Sakshi and Janvi, Abhishek, Pooja. Very good. See, in this Amravati Vidarbha region, it is a drought hit area. There is lack of rainfall, lack of availability of water. So as a result, agriculture is severely affected and farmers are very badly affected in this region. Farmers end up taking loans from money lenders to survive. And as you know, money lenders, they exploit the farmers. They charge very high interest rates. They push them into a debt burden. And the government has failed to help the farmers. The state government, the central government, the local authorities, they haven't done much to break this vicious chain between farmers and money lenders. So what happens when farmers are pushed into a debt burden, when they can't pay the loans? These money lenders will harass them. They will threaten them. They will even beat them up. And they will humiliate them in front of the entire village. So this has pushed thousands of farmers in the Vidarbha Amravati region to commit suicides. Farmer suicide is very, very high in the Gachiroli Vidarbha Amravati belt. This is the root cause here. The lack of agrarian development, the neglect of farmers, the high rate of farmer suicides, the debt burden that they have fallen into is what has contributed to the support base here in Gachiroli in Maharashtra. Recently, there was an attack just few months ago. Naxals carried out a major attack here against the CRPF and the state police forces. You might have read about it in newspapers. Then apart from that, the other major districts include Bijapur, Dantewad, Sukma, Bastar, Malkangiri, which are present in the Chhattisgarh-Odisha belt. This today is the stronghold of Naxal operations. Bastar, Malkangiri, Dantewad, Bijapur. This is Bijapur of Chhattisgarh, not of Karnataka. In Karnataka, you have another Bijapur. That's different. This Bijapur is of Chhattisgarh. Dantewad and Sukma. These are the major strongholds of the CPI Maoists today. This is where the major attacks take place. In the last few years, several major attacks have taken place in Sukma, Dantewad, in Malkangiri and Bastar. Is that clear? In fact, in Malkangiri, the district commissioner, the deputy commissioner, who's an IAS officer, had been kidnapped a few years ago. So government officials face a major threat here. I'm not telling this to scare you, but that is the reality. That is the hardship, the challenges faced by IAS and IPS officers who are deployed in these difficult areas. But again, that is the beauty of the job. That is the challenge, right? To deal with extremism, to provide better administration and governance, thus serve the country, serve the people, right? Then have you heard about a region called Swabhiman Anchal? Yes or no? Have you heard about Swabhiman Anchal? Any idea where it is located? Only Kishan says yes. So tell me, Kishan, where is it located? Very good. Srihari and Munna and Pravasini have given the right answer. It is in Odisha. Swabhiman Anchal is a region in Odisha which suffered from lack of connectivity because of a dam project. See, there was a large dam that was built on one of the rivers, which is part of the Mahanadi system. This dam construction had created a backwater, right? You know, right? When dams are created, a backwater is created which submerges the land behind it. So because of this submergence of land, the Swabhiman Anchal region got completely cut off from the rest of the country. It became an island. Because of the dam, water surrounded this region from all the sides, and Swabhiman Anchal got cut off from the rest of Odisha. Now, this is a forested tribal area. In this forested tribal area, the tribal communities, the indigenous tribal communities, they were already affected by the dam project because they had lost their land. Some of them had been evicted. They lost their livelihood. And upon that, the backwater, which turned Swabhiman Anchal into an island, cut off this whole region from the rest of the state. So for several years, Swabhiman Anchal suffered from lack of development. Without connectivity, how will you provide development? The people of Swabhiman Anchal, they had to move only through boats. There was no bridge, no buses, no kind of connectivity. So the lack of development here created a base for Naxals. They exploited the resentment amongst the tribals. And the Naxals created a strong base in Swabhiman Anchal. This was another important stronghold of the Naxals in Odisha. But today, things are changing. Today, connectivity has been established. Now, India is doing much better when it comes to tackling Naxalism in the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, India has done very well in countering Naxalism. We are not just targeting them through a security approach, we are addressing the developmental issues, the governance issues. So, connectivity has been established, welfare is being provided to the region, and we have been able to counter Naxal influence quite effectively in Swabhiman Anchal. So credit goes to the Odisha government, the district authorities who have done a decent job in tackling the threat. So these are places that you should be familiar with. These are the stronghold of Naxals today. In the last 2 decades, from 2004 till now, since CPI Maoist was formed, if you ask me which is the stronghold of the Naxals, it is these places that I have mentioned and highlighted. Gachiroli, Dantewad, Malkangiri, Bastar, Swabhiman Anchal, Sukma, Bijapur, and few other places. Is that clear? So, according to data provided by the Ministry of Home Affairs, in 2007, when Naxalism had revived, Naxal influence had spread to 185 districts. Naxal influence was being seen in at least 185 districts of the country. That is nearly 33% of India's geographical area had come under some sort of Naxal influence. Out of these 185 districts, at least in 60 to 80 districts, Naxals had formed a stronghold. They had established a stronghold where they could challenge the administration and the authorities. And at least in 30 to 40 districts, they were claiming to have created liberated zones, at least, if not the entire district, at least in few villages. They would claim that they had removed the administration and they would claim them as liberated zones. So that's why I told you, we saw the revival of Naxalism post 2004. From 2004 till 2009, there was a major revival of Naxalism in the country. The influence spread very quickly, very rapidly because of the strategic alliance that they had formed. So with more cadres, more weapons, and a new base, they operated more effectively, raising their attacks against the Indian state. So that is the reason why former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had labeled Naxalism, that is left-wing extremism, as the biggest internal security threat for India. This was the perfect assessment by the former Prime Minister. When Naxalism was again hitting its peak, there was a conference which is organized every year. There is a National Security Conference which is organized by the Intelligence Bureau, the IB. It organizes a security conference every single year. Prime Minister and Home Minister both participate in it, and all the state DGPs are invited. All the state police forces, their heads, the DGP, they're all invited to it. And all central agencies also participate. So basically, it's like a stock-taking conference where they take stock of the security situation in the country. So in this IB conference, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, back then, he had stated that the biggest threat for India is not Northeast insurgency or Khalistan movement or even Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. At that point, when Naxals had extended their influence to nearly 33% of the country, the biggest threat for India was the internal security threat posed by the Naxals. So he labeled the CPI Maoists as the biggest security threat for India, and following this, a major offensive was launched by the Manmohan Singh government against the CPI Maoist. We are going to study this in the next part of our discussion. By 2007 2008, the government of India came out with a fresh strategy to counter Naxalism. Because by then, the CPI Maoist had become a stronger entity in 2 to 3 years. So from 2007 2008 onwards, India organized a better response against Naxalism. Along with a security approach, there was an effective developmental approach taken from 2007 onwards. And especially the major counterinsurgency operations that began dealt a severe blow to CPI Maoist. Is that clear? So, this major offensive, along with the developmental approach, led India to see some success against CPI Maoist. A developmental approach was also taken up by the central government and state governments. So, better welfare was provided. The governance deficit was bridged very quickly at a rapid pace, along with very effective offensive counterinsurgency operations. So, as a result, the CPI Maoist was again put on the back foot. So, over the last decade, you actually see a decline in Naxalism again. By 2017, the Home Ministry stated that Naxal influence had been reduced to less than 100 districts. Their stronghold areas had been brought down to under 40 districts. And there was almost no liberated zone, as the Indian administration took full control of these affected areas. Almost no liberated zone exists in the last few years. Their influence was limited to less than 100 districts, with a stronghold being present in some 30 to 40 districts. This was according to data from 2017. Because the security operations and the developmental approach started by the Manmohan Singh government was continued by the Modi government as well. Under the Modi government, the approach was continued with greater coordination with the state police forces, better involvement of intelligence agencies, better training, better weapons. So these 15 to 20 years have been crucial in our fight against Naxalism. Under the last two governments, the current Modi government and the previous Manmohan Singh government, India has seen tremendous success in weakening Naxalism in the country. According to latest data that MHA has provided, Naxal influence is today down to less than 40 districts. Their stronghold is reduced to around 10 to 20 districts, not more than that. So today, Naxals have been really cornered thanks to the twin approach that India has followed to counter Naxalism. Is that clear? We have followed a twin approach. The biggest change that we saw was the acknowledgement of the genuine root causes. In fact, starting under Prime Minister Vajpayee itself, India started acknowledging that yes, the state has failed, governance has failed, there are people who have been affected for whom injustice has been done. So this acknowledgement of the root cause was very important. This was continued by the Manmohan Singh government, and a twin approach was launched. On one hand, major offensive security operations were launched. Along with that, the welfare approach, the developmental governance approach was taken to bridge the gap in governance, to bridge the governance deficit. This has been continued by the Modi government. So that is why I told you the last 15-20 years has been very crucial for India in its fight against Naxalism. Even though we saw a revival in the early part of 2000, today we have really weakened the movement, cornered the Naxals into just few districts and few villages. Understood? So today India is in a much better position to almost wipe out this movement entirely. Is that clear? But since the Naxals are still active in some of these districts that I mentioned, they remain a threat for India, even though they don't represent the same level of threat that they did a few years ago. So this is what you should understand about the rise, evolution, and spread of Naxalism in the country. There can be a mains question on this. UPSC can give you a 15 marks question asking you to explain what is Naxalism and discuss the rise, spread, and evolution of Naxalism in the country. So from 1967 till now, how has the movement evolved? Right? You need to have this broad idea. In which parts of the country did it spread? What extent of the country was affected? Which groups existed? How did they merge? How did India counter them? And what is the current status today? So you need to present this. You can even draw rough maps highlighting the strongholds as we discussed and point out that today this is the base. The Chhattisgarh Odisha belt is the base of Naxals as of today. Understood? So this completes a big part of this chapter. Most of the key topics have been covered. Now we head towards the last section, countering left-wing extremism. Here we will study the response of the Indian state in complete detail. The twin approach that I was talking about will be discussed in complete detail. As I told you, fighting such a strong ideological movement cannot see any success if you just approach this as a security problem. To defeat the ideology, to pull the mass support away from these extremists, you need to win the hearts and minds of the local people, which means you have to do justice to those who have been affected by poor governance and failure of administration. You have to focus on the farmers, the tribal communities, the peasants, the workers. You need to provide better welfare, do justice to people who have been lost out, provide better connectivity, better development in the remote areas, in the forested areas. Along with that, you need very effective offensive security operations. So it's a combination of the developmental approach with security approach, which will give us success. So India has been following this at least from 2004 till date. This has become our approach in the last 2 decades. India acknowledged the genuine root causes. India acknowledged the genuine root causes that existed. Remember, the then Planning Commission, which existed before the Niti Aayog, publicly admitted and pointed out that there were several pockets in India which were left behind. Because see, after 1991, India saw tremendous growth. The LPG reforms, the economic reforms had been introduced. So in late 90s and early 2000, India became one of the fastest growing emerging economies in the world. But this growth benefited only few parts of the country. The southern, western parts of India, the cities, they largely developed, they progressed. But in this globalized era, there were many parts of India that were getting left behind. So it was like two different versions of India. One India which is growing very fast, which is an aspirational India, where there are opportunities, better quality of life. But the other India was still backward, left behind, very poor, vulnerable, right? So there were two Indias that existed. It exists even today, in fact. But over the last 2 decades, we have done much, much better to bridge that gap, to bring the two Indias together. So the developmental approach with the security approach has given a lot of success for India. That is what we'll be studying under the last part of the discussion. So as part of the development approach, the government has focused on providing for better governance to bridge the deficit, the gap in governance. The focus is on welfare. Along with the welfare approach, intelligence-based counterinsurgency operations have become very effective in the last 2 decades. The state police forces are better prepared, better equipped, better trained. The central government pitches in with any assistance that is needed. The center has given a lot of funds for the concerned states to step up their fight against Naxalism. Central agencies like Intelligence Bureau, NTRO, and many others, they are actively involved in this fight, assisting the state governments and state police forces. Then central forces as well, including CRPF and others, are involved in assisting the state forces. Even the Indian armed forces, the Indian Army and Indian Air Force, are playing a role in the security operations. So this improved coordination between center and state, and the better training, better funds, better weapons, better strategies has led to the success of our intelligence-led counterinsurgency operations. Meaning we have been conducting targeted operations, targeting the top leaders, the mid-level commanders, eliminating them, arresting them, cutting their finances. So these operations have been very effective for India in the last 2 decades. That is the primary reason why the movement has weakened. Is that clear? So we will study this in complete detail. Now, before I take up this discussion, I want to present one more important point. There is one last point I would like to make, and then we can take up the last part of the discussion. Now, in these maps, if you observed, there are some other regions as well which are shown under Naxal influence. Like, for example, the Delhi, Punjab region, the Delhi, Punjab region, correct? Then parts of Assam, and if you observe, even parts of Western Ghats. Particularly the Western Ghats in Karnataka, Kerala, and parts of Tamil Nadu. So the map is showing that even these parts of the country, they were previously under Naxal influence. Now, can you guys take a guess as to what might have contributed to the presence of Naxal influence in these parts of the country? We'll go one by one. I'll mention the region. You tell me in the comments what could be the reason that contributed to the rise of Naxal influence. Let's start with Punjab. Why do you think Naxal influence spread to an extent in Punjab? Border with Pakistan? No. Religion? No. Religion has nothing to do with it. Khalistan movement? No. Vedashri has given the right answer. Even Sham. It's primarily issues associated with farmers. I hope you know Punjab is primarily an agrarian state where agriculture is a key component of the economy, right? Issues related to farmers was exploited by the Maoists to create a base in some districts of Punjab. It had nothing to do with Khalistan movement or Pakistan. Is that clear? Then second region, Delhi NCR region. In the Delhi and NCR region, even there Naxal influence was noted. What could be the reason here? What could be the reason in the Delhi NCR region? Unemployment, migration, rapid urbanization, industry. Deepika has mentioned industry. Very good. I hope you know that Delhi NCR belt is heavily industrialized and urbanized. Here, primary issue was the divide in the industry. The divide between the management and the workers. Because several factory workers, they felt exploited. They felt the management, which was rich and influential, they had the support of the government and the police. They felt that they had a corrupt nexus with politicians and government officials who were favoring the management all the time, and workers were losing out. They wouldn't be paid salaries, their benefits wouldn't be provided, their welfare was not being taken care of. So this divide within the industry, right, between management and workers is what created some base in Delhi NCR region as well. All right. Then coming to Western Ghats, what could be the reason? Take a guess. In Karnataka, a place called Agumbe, which is a popular hill station, and in the Nilgiri belt of Tamil Nadu, in the Wayanad region of Kerala. All these are beautiful locations. Almost all of them are like hill stations, recreational centers, rich with biodiversity. What do you think was the reason here? Very good. The tribal issues and forest areas. That is the reason. In these densely forested areas of Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, it was tribal issues which was primarily exploited by Naxals. All right? But very quickly, these movements declined. In Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, these are well developed states, right? There is no such developmental gap that existed. These Naxals were simply trying to create a presence and influence for themselves by trying to brainwash the tribal communities. But very quickly, the movement was stamped out by the concerned police forces and the intelligence agencies. The Kerala police, Karnataka police, and Tamil Nadu police, they would act very proactively to wipe out this movement, and it does not exist today. Today, Western Ghats is free from Naxalism. All right? Same with Punjab, Delhi, NCR region. Naxalism has no role to play here. Coming to Assam. In Assam, I'll tell you the reason. The reason why Naxals managed to have a presence here was because Naxals started working with some of the Northeast insurgent groups. Naxals started taking support from Northeast insurgent outfits like ULFA, NSCN, NDFB, and others. They tied up with these Northeast insurgents to get arms and weapons primarily. Because Northeast insurgents had easy access to weapons. We'll study that in the third chapter. So Naxals, who are ready to form strategic alliances, they reached out to Northeast insurgents, built contacts with them. They got in touch with organized criminal cartels who smuggled drugs and weapons. And they started sourcing advanced weapons from them, including getting involved in drug trafficking. Is that clear? So that is when we noted a presence in Northeast India as well. Coming to the foreign influence. The big question is, did Naxals have any kind of foreign support? What do you think? What do you think? What kind of foreign support have Naxals enjoyed? Any idea? Yes, all of you are saying yes, and you're mentioning China and Pakistan. Very good. China and Pakistan, they have played a role in backing the Naxal movement in India. All right, but however, please note down, their role has been very limited. If you take the last 60, 70 years into account and the kind of support China and Pakistan have given to Naxalism, it's actually been very limited support. All right. China, of course, was actively backing the rise of Maoism around the world, not just in India. China being the birthplace of Maoism and PRC being the product of Maoist movement. China wanted to see the rise of Maoism around the world. So in many countries, Chinese security and intelligence agencies have sponsored the rise of Maoism, especially in the initial years in India in 1960s, 70s, 80s, during that period after the 1962 war. Since we had a standing border dispute, we had fought a war, China wanted to destabilize India further. So it started backing Northeast insurgents as well, along with supporting the rise of Maoism in India. So China did provide some funds and weapons that contributed to the rise of Naxalism. But later, its support has been very limited. Is that clear? These contacts have been very limited. Guys, I think there was a technical issue. I saw that the video and the audio was gone. So let me know if I'm audible and visible right now. Okay, very good. Yeah. So we were discussing about the kind of foreign support that Naxals have enjoyed. They have got some support from China, especially in the initial years, with some funds and weapons. Pakistan also tried to back the Naxals as part of its covert war against India. Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, has maintained some contacts with Naxals, providing some funds and weapons. All right, but again, this has been very limited because Naxalism is largely a homegrown movement. It's a domestic movement rooted in genuine root causes. There has been some degree of foreign involvement, but it's been very limited. And you should also know that Naxals have had contacts with many other insurgent terror groups and criminal organizations. They've had contacts with Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Pakistan-sponsored terrorist organization. They've had contacts with Northeast insurgents. They've had contacts with LTTE of Sri Lanka. And they have worked with various organized criminal cartels. This has been the degree of foreign involvement with regard to the Naxal movement in India. Overall, the support they have had from abroad has been very limited compared to what support other terror groups have got. All right. So, some support from China and Pakistan through their state agencies, and some involvement of non state actors like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Northeast insurgent groups, LTTE, and organized criminal cartels. So, this is something you should be familiar with. Now, I hope everything is clear till now. All the basics that we have covered, including some current affairs, is extremely important. So now I'll take up the last part of the discussion. We'll continue for a few more minutes and then we'll take a short break. So now we'll be talking about the response of India, how India has countered left-wing extremism. First, I'll take up the developmental approach. We'll take a quick look at the developmental strategies that India has followed. And later we'll discuss the security operations, the offensive security operations of India. Now, when it comes to the developmental approach, India's focus was always to improve grassroots governance. Because see, in 1990s, India introduced the Panchayati Raj system and provided for decentralized governance. Correct? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. First of all, apologies for the inconvenience. There was a slight technical issue. So I as well thought we could take our 15 minutes break as well. So now let's continue without any interruption. We will try to close this chapter today by discussing about how India has countered Naxalism. I was mentioning how India has followed a twin approach where we have tackled Naxalism as a security threat with effective intelligence-based counterinsurgency operations. And we've also acknowledged the genuine root causes and we have tried addressing the developmental gap by providing for good governance. So let's discuss these strategies in slight detail. First, we will talk about the developmental strategies followed by India, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, to provide for better welfare for the Naxal affected areas. We'll be discussing some important schemes and initiatives. The idea is to understand the approach that India has taken to solve this problem. After discussing the developmental approach, we'll talk about the security approach. So while we look at the developmental approach, one major initiative that was launched was the Integrated Action Plan or IAP. It was launched in 2010 by the then Manmohan Singh government. As I told you, it was the Manmohan Singh government which dealt with the revival of Naxalism as CPI Maoist had been formed. So, on a priority basis, the government of India designed an approach to counter this threat. I told you that Manmohan Singh had already labeled left wing extremism as India's biggest internal security threat. Because at that point, Naxal influence was increasing rapidly. Their attacks were increasing against our forces. So, to counter the threat and to defeat the ideology, the twin approach was launched, and under the welfare initiatives, one of the most important schemes that was launched was the Integrated Action Plan that was launched by the Ministry of Home Affairs. This program was designed by the erstwhile Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, which existed back then, before the Niti Aayog was created, came out with this developmental program to provide for better grassroots governance. I was mentioning that in the 1990s, India provided for decentralized governance. We created the grassroots institutions, such as Panchayati Raj institutions, with constitutional status. You would have studied in Indian polity that through constitutional amendments, the local bodies were created. The urban local bodies for cities and Panchayati Raj institutions for rural areas. So, as decentralized governance had been introduced, these institutions would play a critical role in administration and welfare. Your Zilla Panchayats at the district level, along with the district authorities, they would play a key role in administration, along with the Taluk Panchayats and the Gram Panchayats. The Gram Sabhas, which represented the lowest unit of decentralized governance, they became critical in providing decentralized governance in the country, in involving the local communities in decision making and in implementation of government welfare schemes and programs. So it required a combined effort from the central government, the state governments, and the local authorities, the district level and village level authorities, to play a role to provide for better administration in the Naxal affected areas. So, by keeping this objective in mind, the Planning Commission designed a program called the Integrated Action Plan. The idea was to provide more funds and more focus from the central government on these affected areas and involve the district and village authorities in providing for better welfare in these affected areas. So a new structure was created for the implementation of this welfare program. It was launched in 2010 and it was implemented for 2 years, for 2 financial years, from 2010 to 11 and 2011 to 12. During these 2 years, special funds were allocated to the most backward tribal districts of the country. Since the tribal and backward districts of the country were the ones which are affected by Naxalism, these districts were chosen. 60 districts where Naxal influence was very strong. They were specifically chosen by the government of India for the implementation of this scheme. In these 60 tribal and backward districts, special funds were provided by the government of India. The Home Ministry, which was implementing this, would provide 25 crore rupees in the first year and 30 crore rupees in the second year for every district. So each district would get 55 crore rupees in dedicated funding. You might think this is not a big amount, but 55 crores per district for local welfare measures is actually a significant amount. This is in addition to all the other ongoing programs. The center and state governments will already be implementing various other programs and initiatives. Apart from that, 55 crores was provided for these districts to provide for local welfare, to address the local issues. And the best part was the state government was largely bypassed in the implementation of this program. The state government would play a limited role. The center would create the national plan, provide the funds, and the district authorities would play an important role in the implementation of the program. So true decentralization was provided because the government of India noticed that at the state level, there was a lot of leakage and diversion of funds that was happening due to corruption. So the intended money would never reach the beneficiaries because of corruption in the system. So state governments were largely bypassed in the implementation. The center would directly monitor the implementation by working with the district authorities. For implementing this scheme, a district level committee was created. A district level committee was created which would consist of the top 3 officials in the district, the 3 All India services, the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service, and the Indian Forest Service. These are the 3 All India services that we have. These officers play a critical role. Even though they are working under the state cadre, they act as a vital link for the central government to provide for administration at the district level. I hope you know that every district administration is headed by the district collector, the DC of the district. See, this designation changes from state to state. In some states, this role is called deputy commissioner. In some states, it is called district magistrate. So it's called DC or DM in different states. But the role is exactly the same. The DC or DM of the district is the highest ranking officer of that particular district. The entire district's administration will be under the control, the command and control of this IAS officer. Usually, junior IAS officers who would have just finished their probation, who are still in their initial years of service, they are posted as DCs and DMs, where they gain enormous field experience in district administration. It's one of the most powerful roles that an IAS officer can get. So if you guys clear the exam, finish your training, within few months or within a year, you get to become the DC or the DM of a district where you head the entire district administration. From land to revenue to even police and law and order, everything will be under the DC. Understood? So under the chairmanship of the DC, this district committee was set up, which also included the SP of the district. The SP is the superintendent of police who heads the district police, who is a IAS, who is an IPS officer. Usually junior or mid-level IPS officers, they are appointed as SPs of districts. They head the entire district police. They're in charge of crime, law and order, and all the security issues of that particular district. So this IPS officer, the senior most IPS officer of the district, with the district forest officer from the Indian Forest Service, these 3 officers from All India Services were made a part of this district committee. These 55 crore rupees will be placed under the disposal of this committee. These 3 officers will decide how the money will be spent, on what programs, on what initiatives. But however, it's not a fully discretionary power. These officials of the district committee, they will consult with the panchayat leaders. They will consult with the local elected officials. They will talk to the MLAs, the MP from the district. They will consult with the panchayat officials at the Zilla Panchayat, Gram Panchayat, at the Gram Sabhas. They'll consult with the local people. So this local involvement was mandatory. So this committee headed by the DC, which also includes the SP and the forest officer, they will consult with all the political representatives and the local people to determine as to what issue is the most important issue for that particular district. Essentially, it provided for a customized plan. Because see, when so many states and districts are affected by poor governance, the issues will be different from state to state, from district to district, from village to village. Maybe in Jharkhand, roads are not available in a particular district. In Odisha, maybe there is no electricity. In Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, maybe schools are not sufficient. So the issue will be different from district to district and village to village. So you can't have a uniform national plan. So the beauty of the structure of this plan was that the government created a broad framework at the national level. The government allocated dedicated funds, and Home Ministry would oversee the implementation along with Planning Commission. They will monitor how it is being implemented. But the decision making was decentralized. Is that clear? The funds were provided to the district authorities who will handle these funds. The district committee will take the decision based on the consultation they will have with political representatives, especially the panchayat level, including consultation with the local people. So it provided for participative democracy, where the local community participates in the decision making. The tribals, the farmers, the local leaders, they can voice their opinion. They can consult with the district authorities who are part of this committee, highlight the issues, and accordingly, the money can be spent. The focus was on quick implementation, achieving quick results. The focus was on small projects which can be completed quickly within few months, within a year, which could have a high impact on the local people, which will improve the life of the local people. That was the focus of this plan. It was a customized plan where there was scope for customization at the district level. So this flexibility that was built in was crucial. And since the state government was largely bypassed, it would save the time, the delays, it would avoid all the red tapeism and corruption as well. So this was the integrated action plan. State government played a role only in monitoring the implementation. Because see, these officers eventually are under the state cadre. They are part of the state government, the state bureaucracy. So at the state level, the development commissioner of that region, who is a senior IAS officer, would monitor how the district committees are functioning, how they are implementing the schemes, whether the funds are being spent properly, whether the projects are being completed. So this would be monitored by the development commissioner of that region. In every state, there are zones. The state is divided into different administrative zones. Each zone is headed by a development commissioner who is a senior IAS officer, or at least a mid-level IAS officer. So this officer would look at the implementation and how the funds are being spent by the various district committees present in their zone. So this was the overall structure. Understood? Now let me tell you what kind of initiatives were taken up, what kind of projects were implemented. Before that, please note down that Planning Commission not only designed the plan, but it would also monitor the implementation and effectiveness of the plan. So Planning Commission would monitor this at the national level along with Home Ministry, and the funds that are spent would be audited by the CAG to ensure that there is no corruption, there is no leakage of funds or wastage of funds. The CAG would audit the entire expenditure. This would provide accountability as well in the scheme. Now, coming to the kind of projects that were taken up, it mainly focused on creating basic infrastructure, like building village level roads, providing piped water connection, restoring the local water bodies like ponds and tanks and lakes, ensuring that bore wells are functioning so that villagers have enough water to drink, creating toilets to provide better sanitation, better hygiene, strengthening the school infrastructure to provide better education, improving the health infrastructure, creating livelihood and employment opportunities. This was the focus of integrated action plan. Now, these schemes can be very easily implemented. Like, let's say, computers have to be provided for a school, or piped water supply for few villages, a village road for some villages. This can be taken up quickly, implemented very quickly within few months or a year, but it would have a very high impact and high visibility. The local people can see the projects right in front of them. They will get the benefits immediately. So the idea was to ensure that the locals feel the presence of the state. Ensure that the local people feel the presence of the state. This was the idea. That is why Home Ministry was taking care of this project. Usually, Home Ministry does not implement development schemes. It's involved with security matters, center-state relations, etc. Development schemes are implemented by other ministries. But in this special case, these development programs in the tribal backward districts were implemented under the Home Ministry itself. So Home Ministry would provide the dedicated funding, monitor the implementation as well. The idea was to ensure that locals will feel the presence of the state, the government. Because see, in the Naxal affected areas, Naxals have bred resentment against the state. The failure of the government in the previous years has already created a divide between the people and the government. So it's important to bring the government back into the picture, to show that the government cares for the people. The government is there to benefit the people. So with this idea, a flexible, customized, decentralized plan was implemented to ensure that the local community feels the presence of the state. That was the best way to counter the presence of Naxals. So the Home Ministry and Planning Commission, they had highlighted certain key areas of focus under the plan. See, in India, we have various constitutional measures, legal measures to provide for the upliftment of tribal and backward communities. We have enough constitutional and legal measures, but problem was they were never effectively implemented. So under the integrated action plan, the rights that were promised under various constitutional legal provisions, they were made a priority. Like, for example, you would have heard about the 5th and 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. I hope you guys have covered your polity. Let me know what does 5th and 6th schedule deal with. See, that's why I told you at the beginning itself, the subject is connected to other subjects. So you should have that background knowledge. Very good. The 5th schedule deals with scheduled areas, which are essentially tribal areas. It provides for special administration in some of the tribal areas in few states. Do you know who notifies these scheduled areas under 5th schedule? Who has the power to notify scheduled areas under 5th schedule? Very good. Many of you are getting the right answer. Very good. I'm really happy. That shows that you guys are preparing well. It is the President of India who has the authority to notify scheduled areas under 5th schedule. Once these scheduled areas are declared, the governor of that state gets a few special powers, discretionary powers, to look after the administration of those scheduled areas. A tribal council will also be created at the state level, comprising of state level ministers. A tribal advisory council is set up by the governor, where the state ministers will advise the governor on what kind of welfare should be provided in the tribal areas that are declared as scheduled areas. Similarly, we have the 6th schedule, which also deals with tribal areas, but in 4 northeastern states. In 4 northeastern states, the tribal areas are separately designated. Which are these states? Which are the 4 northeastern states where 6th schedule applies? Good. Again, a lot of you are getting the right answer. Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Tripura. These 4 northeastern states, they have a separate constitutional provision to provide for autonomy in the tribal districts. Under this, autonomous district councils are set up, where constitutional autonomy is given to these tribal districts to look after their own administration. We will study more about this under the Northeast Insurgency chapter. So there are around 10 districts in these 4 states where autonomous district councils have been created, which provides constitutional autonomy to these tribal districts. So the local tribal community can look after their own administration. So these are important constitutional provisions that we have for the tribal regions in the country. But problem is they have not been well implemented. There are several gaps in their implementation. Then in these tribal areas, Panchayati Raj institutions don't exist. When Panchayati Raj system was created with constitutional status, they wouldn't apply for scheduled areas and tribal areas in the country. So a separate law was enacted called the PESA Act, the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act, which would extend the Panchayati Raj system to the scheduled areas as well. So this is a legal provision extending decentralization, extending the Panchayati Raj system to the scheduled areas. So these basic laws and constitutional provisions, they guarantee certain rights for our tribal communities. But there have been gaps in their implementation. Then you would have heard about the Forest Rights Act, the FRA of 2006. It was a flagship law that was introduced by the Manmohan Singh government. Through the Forest Rights Act, the forest dwelling communities, the scheduled tribes which reside in forest areas, they were given their traditional forest rights. It was given as a legal right. They were given title rights over their land. They were given title and land rights, meaning these communities can continue residing in the forest areas. The scheduled tribes and forest dwelling communities, which have a traditional right to reside in the forest, that right was recognized as a legal right. Got it? Their title and land rights were recognized, along with their right to collect minor forest produce. The previous laws had disrupted this traditional right of tribal communities in India. Remember, I mentioned how environmental laws had displaced tribal communities from forest areas, how they had lost their homes, how their livelihood was affected. Their right to collect forest produce had been disrupted by the previous conservation laws and environmental laws. Through the Forest Rights Act, these rights were being restored to the tribal communities. They also got the right to conserve the forests. They got a community right where the whole community could play a role in the conservation of their forests, which they worship. Previous laws did not take into account the role of tribals in forest conservation. For the first time, this was recognized as a legal right. So FRA is a very, very important law with regard to tribal welfare in the country and tribal rights in the country. But in its implementation, there have been certain gaps and flaws. So through integrated action plan, the focus was to ensure that the rights that were guaranteed through these laws and constitutional provisions would be better implemented. The provisions of PESA, 5th and 6th schedule, the FRA and other concerned laws, they will be the focus through which the district authorities will provide basic facilities and better infrastructure to support these tribal communities and backward areas. So through this approach, the presence of the state will be firmly established in the Naxal dominated areas. The local people will look at the government in a different light. Their image, their perception of the government will change when they start benefiting from these projects. So that is why integrated action plan was one of the most important welfare initiatives implemented to counter Naxalism. So this is one example I'm giving you. There have been many other schemes and initiatives as well, and especially in newspapers, in current affairs, you might come across few more programs and initiatives. I want you guys to make a note of it. When you're reading an editorial or a column, or if, let's say, government launches a new scheme, please make a note of that. Like recently, Prime Minister Modi has launched a dedicated scheme for tribal welfare. It was launched just last month. Do you know the name of the scheme? Does anyone know which scheme has been launched last month for tribal welfare? Kuraku, Megha and Abhijit, Shreyank, Sanskar. Some of the students are getting it right. Very good. It is the PM Jan Man scheme. Please read about it. It's a dedicated scheme being launched for the first time for welfare of PVTGs in India, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. There are 75 tribes in the country which are categorized as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. For their welfare, a specific dedicated scheme has been launched called PM Janman. It focuses on the Janjati community, the tribal communities. It tries to provide better infrastructure in these tribal belts to improve governance in these areas. So you can mention all these schemes and initiatives as the approach of the government to provide better development, better governance in the tribal areas, which helps in countering Naxalism as well. Is that clear? Another example would be the Saranda Action Plan, which is very similar to integrated action plan implemented by the state government of Jharkhand. You should be aware of some state government initiatives as well, because don't forget, fighting Naxalism is the responsibility of the state governments primarily. It's not the center which has the primary responsibility to fight Naxalism. It is the state government. Why? Because this is essentially a policing problem. It's a law and order problem. It's an internal security problem. Is that clear? Police and law and order, they are state subjects under the 7th schedule of the Constitution. Internal security is on the concurrent list. It's a joint responsibility of center and states. So since states play a bigger role, the state police plays a bigger role, they have to take the lead in fighting Naxalism. The center can only complement them. The center can only assist them. It can only build coordination, give more funds, better training, better forces. But the leadership has to come from the state level to fight Naxalism. It's their primary responsibility. So state governments also have their own initiatives, like Saranda Action Plan that was launched by Jharkhand, which was a rural livelihood development program. It was very similar to integrated action plan. Dedicated funds were given to create employment and livelihood opportunities in Jharkhand. It was supported by the Ministry of Rural Development. Central government was also involved. The Rural Development Ministry was working with Jharkhand to implement the Saranda Action Plan, started in 2011. So let's say there is a question asking you to talk about the developmental initiatives, welfare schemes, which have been implemented to counter Naxalism or improve governance in tribal areas. You have to mention all these initiatives. I've given 2, 3 examples. You can add to the list and provide your answer. Next, another important development initiative, Civic Action Program. Civic Action Program is implemented by the Central Armed Police Forces, the CAPFs. See, under the Home Ministry, there are few paramilitary forces. These are the armed police forces of the central government. Just like your state police represents the armed force of the state, the armed police force of the state, the central government also has its own police forces. They are officially categorized as CAPFs, Central Armed Police Forces. They are under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Some of them are border guarding forces like BSF, ITBP, SSB. There are some forces like CRPF, which are involved in internal security of the country. So these CAPFs, when they are deployed in a conflict zone, to carry out counter-insurgency operations, they rely heavily on local support. In any conflict, local support is critical for our security forces. This will determine the future course of the conflict. This applies for Indian Army as well. Now, for example, Indian Army is also involved in counterinsurgency in Northeast India, in Jammu and Kashmir, right? So these security forces, which are fighting insurgents and terrorists, they rely heavily on local support. It could be the armed forces of India like Indian Army or the CAPFs of Home Ministry, the paramilitary forces of the Home Ministry. See, in a conflict zone, locals are usually inclined towards insurgents. There might be some sympathy for the insurgents, or some of them might be neutral. Very few people will be in favor of the government. Now, when these security forces are being deployed in a difficult conflict zone, how can they operate without local support in favor of them? Because they will need local intelligence. They will need locals to not support the extremists, because some of the sympathizers might be giving funds, might be giving shelter, or might be passing information to the extremists. So it's very important to bring the locals on your side. It's very important to build trust between the local people and the security forces. You need to create a positive image for the security forces, create a goodwill for them. Because see, during security operations, things might go wrong. Let's say CRPF is conducting an anti-Naxal operation in Chhattisgarh. And in this fight between CRPF and Naxals, local civilians might get shot. They might get injured or killed. So during such a difficult moment, to ensure that locals don't resent the forces, we should create a positive image. We should create a trust factor between locals and the security forces. Only then locals will give us intelligence. Only then they will have faith in the force and the state. And only then they will give us that crucial local support to defeat the extremists. So since conflict zones are very dangerous environments for the security forces, the government tries to create a positive image around the forces by implementing a welfare scheme called Civic Action Program. This is implemented by the security forces themselves. Government agencies will not play a role. Security forces like CRPF, Indian Army, wherever they are deployed, wherever they are engaging in counterinsurgency, they will implement Civic Action Program. So when people see that the forces are working for them, helping them, they will start trusting the forces. They'll start having good faith towards the security forces. So dedicated funds are given by the Home Ministry to the CAPFs to implement Civic Action Program. Because see, security forces, they already have a lot of assets with them. Like for example, they have a team of doctors, they'll have a medical unit, right? They'll have medical supplies. So they will conduct free medical camps for local people. Top officials who would have cleared government exams like UPSC exams, they will run coaching classes, free coaching classes for civil services exam, the assistant commandant exams, right? Whenever they get time, they run free coaching classes to train them for government exams and banking exams. They will have engineering equipment with them so they can build roads or bridges, repair some infrastructure which has been damaged. They will have communication equipment with them so they can connect remote areas, especially during disasters. Let's say a disaster has happened. These forces can conduct rescue operations, rescue people, provide communication to those areas. So those are the kind of initiatives which are taken up by security forces to bridge the gap between them and the local people. So such programs are called civic action program. These welfare activities implemented by the security forces in a conflict zone, they are called as civic action program. It provides for better governance as well, improves the infrastructure, improves the lives of the locals. At the same time, it creates a positive image for the forces and bridges the gap, creates trust between locals and the security forces. Indian Army implements this in Jammu and Kashmir. CRPF implements this in Naxal corridor. Is that clear? So civic action program is another important welfare initiative. Next, the Universal Service Obligation Fund. Some of you would have heard about it. This fund is set up under the Department of Telecom. It was established through the new telecom policy. The new telecom policy of 1999 created this fund. So under this fund, the telecom service providers in the country, the private telecom service providers, they contribute a part of their revenue. They contribute a part of their revenue into this fund. Why? Because see, in India, there are many remote unconnected areas which have no mobile connectivity or internet connectivity. Private companies, they will not have an incentive or a motive to establish infrastructure in remote unconnected areas because they have to invest crores of rupees to create the back-end infrastructure, but they may not get enough subscribers. So reaching out to such areas can be loss-making for private companies. So as private companies are driven by the profit motive, they will never connect remote areas. So this is where the government steps in. The government said, look, we'll set up a fund. All the revenue that you're making from other parts of the country, deposit a small part of that revenue into this fund. We will use that fund through government entities like BSNL, and we will create the telecom infrastructure that is needed for remote, unconnected areas. Essentially, the government will take the lead. Since private companies can't bear the loss, since private companies have no incentive to provide connection in remote areas, right, they'll never reach out because it's practical. They'll not get subscribers. Even if they invest crores of rupees in creating the infrastructure, they'll not get enough subscribers to make a profit, to make it a sustainable business. So that is why the government said under the new telecom policy that, look, we are creating this fund, the Universal Service Obligation Fund. It will be administered through the Department of Telecom. In your yearly revenue, you're making a lot of money in other sectors, contribute a small part of it. A prescribed percentage of that is contributed into this fund. Government will use that fund through agencies like BSNL, and it will create the necessary infrastructure. So the government will be the catalyst. Government will take the lead to create the basic infrastructure to create a subscriber base. Then private sector can come in and take over that market. So that is the concept. So this fund is to connect all remote areas in the country. It's not specific to Naxal areas. It is to connect the border regions, the mountainous areas, the unconnected regions, etc. But within this fund, there is a dedicated allocation for left-wing extremism affected regions. There is a separate allocation made under the fund for areas affected by Naxalism. Because see, in today's world, mobile and internet connectivity can transform a region. Just like road connectivity can transform a region. Just like train and air connectivity can transform a region. Similarly, today digital connectivity is equally important. The moment you provide mobile connectivity and internet connections, automatically the economy will transform. It will create new businesses, create new livelihood employment opportunities, and it will create a thriving local economy. In Naxal areas, the lack of communication, the lack of connectivity was a big problem. This will also help the government authorities, the security forces, because improved communication will benefit the government itself. So with this concept, a dedicated allocation was made within the Universal Service Obligation Fund so that on a priority basis, mobile and internet connections can be extended to Naxal affected areas as well. Through this, today we have transformed these tribal areas and forested areas. Today, almost all these regions are connected. At least basic mobile and internet connection exists in almost every nook and corner of the country. Next, we have implemented a skill development program called Roshni. It's a skill development initiative to provide basic skills and training, vocational training for tribals, so that they can find employment opportunities, they can support their livelihood, they can even start their own enterprises. Because see, tribals who have limited education, limited exposure, they may not easily get jobs, they may not easily get loans because they lack other skills. They will usually have very limited skills, and it makes it difficult for them to secure a job or to start a business. So if the government provides them skill training, if the government provides them basic vocational training, then they can find employment opportunities. Government can work with banks to provide concessional loans. Easy credit can be provided so that they can start their small businesses and enterprises, like providing tailoring skills, providing courses for electricians, plumbers, craftsmen, carpentry, pottery. Such basic skills can be taught. Correct? So through these skills and vocational training programs under Roshni, tribals today have employment and livelihood opportunities, along with the opportunity to start their own enterprises. Next, another important step in a conflict zone is to provide quick compensation to the victims and the affected families, along with having a surrender and rehabilitation policy. These two measures are also very important because, see, at the end of the day, even the extremists and those who are supporting them, they are your own people, they are our own citizens. So the goal here is not to wipe out everyone, eliminate everyone. Just by using force, you can never win conflicts. If that was the case, by now Russia would have captured Ukraine. Israel would have captured Palestine. Why do you think these conflicts keep dragging, even after they use disproportionate heavy force? That's because force only leads to more violence. It creates a vicious cycle of violence. The Indian governments have very well understood this. In that way, India is very lucky because we have had very sensible, responsible governments, and they've all taken a decision not to use disproportionate force against our citizens, especially with regard to Naxalism. Right? There is a policy decision in place to not use the armed forces of India. Have you ever thought about this? Indian Army is not involved in fighting Naxals, not directly. Indian Air Force is not bombing Naxal areas. If you look at Israel, it's bombing Gaza, even targeting civilians if required. If you look at Russia, it has targeted civilians openly. Right? Okay, if you take them as external wars, even in internal situations, there are countries which have used disproportionate military force. Look at Myanmar. Myanmar is facing an internal crisis. It's been using its army and air force to target its own people. So what happens at the end? It only leads to human rights violations. It only perpetuates the violence, creates a vicious cycle of violence. In India, we have had responsible governments, and subsequent governments have all decided to not use disproportionate excessive force to fight Naxalism and internal threats. Unless and until there is a credible threat to our sovereignty, unless and until there is serious external involvement and sponsorship, we will not deploy armed forces against our people. Is that clear? Now you might ask, sir, in Northeast India, Indian Army is fighting insurgents. In Jammu and Kashmir, Indian Army is fighting insurgents and terrorists. That's because the circumstances are different. Northeast India and Jammu and Kashmir are border regions. There is a cross-border involvement. Northeast insurgents have got support from Myanmar, Bangladesh, China. They easily cross the border, take shelter in Myanmar and Bangladesh. They are getting funds and weapons from other countries like China and Pakistan. Same with Jammu and Kashmir, right? The insurgency, terrorism in Kashmir is entirely Pakistan-sponsored. So there the threat for our sovereignty is more serious and credible. There is direct foreign involvement. There is cross-border terrorism. So the circumstances are different. That is why the Indian Army is deployed in an offensive role to conduct counterinsurgency operations. But to fight Naxals, no government of India has ever deployed Indian Army or Indian Air Force to target our own citizens. Because see, armed forces are trained to use excessive force. Armed forces are never suited for an internal conflict because they are meant for external enemies like hostile states like Pakistan, which might go to war with India. So armed forces like Army, Navy, Air Force, they are trained to kill. Their first option is to kill the enemy. They have heavy weaponry with them. They have fighter jets, missiles, battle tanks, artillery guns. So they're trained to use maximum force to ensure they kill the enemy, defeat the enemy. So they're meant mainly for external threats. If you deploy your armed forces for an internal threat, they will end up using massive force, which will lead to human rights violations, which will perpetuate the violence. So India has taken a conscious decision to not use the armed forces against Naxals. As I told you, Northeast India is different, Jammu and Kashmir is different. There, yes, Indian Army is deployed, but again in a limited role, only to conduct counterinsurgency operations, only to target the insurgents and terrorists who are getting cross-border support from across the border. But here, we have used limited force. We have used paramilitary forces like CRPF and others to assist our state police forces. Because paramilitary forces, the CAPFs, they are more sensitized. They are in between your state police and your armed force. Now, if you look at your state police, your police forces, they don't even carry weapons sometimes, if you have noticed. Using force by the police is the last option for them. Their training teaches them to be more sensitive because the role of the police is to enforce the law, maintain law and order, tackle crime, tackle internal threats. So they don't use force as the first option, whereas armed forces use force as the first option. That too, maximum force is used by them. So police are trained to open fire only as a last resort. Only when all other options have been exhausted, when there is a threat to their own life or others' life, that is when they open fire. Correct? So your paramilitary, your CAPFs are in between them. They are in between your police and your armed forces. They bring the better skills and training and weapons of your armed forces with the sensitivity of your police. So paramilitary forces, the CAPFs, are much better, much more efficient in fighting internal battles because they have the sensitivity of the police. They know that they should use minimal force. At the same time, they bring better skills, better training, and better weapons as well, like the armed forces. So CAPFs are like the perfect mixture of your police and armed forces. So India has consciously decided to not use excessive force. That is why this war against Naxals is led by state police forces with support from CAPFs. But even in this conflict, there could be collateral damage. Civilians could get shot, they could get injured or killed. That is the unfortunate reality of a conflict zone. Civilians get caught in between the security forces and the insurgents and terrorists. So they will be the victims of this violence. Sometimes your security forces might accidentally open fire. So civilians might accidentally get caught, getting injured and killed, which affects all families here. So they deserve to be compensated. The civilians are also threatened by the extremists, like Naxals. They threaten the civilians to get support from them. If locals don't support them, they threaten them. They beat them up, they even kill them if required. If they believe that civilians are passing information to police and security forces, Naxals are known to target the local villagers as well. So Naxals themselves or any extremists, they commit big violations by targeting civilians. So these victims of a conflict, they have to be compensated. Understood? They have to be immediately compensated because they should feel that the government is caring for them. Now imagine a situation where during an encounter, accidentally civilians have been killed by our security forces. It could happen in a conflict zone. But if they are not compensated, tomorrow the Naxals will reach to these families. They will tell them, see, the government killed your son. They killed your father. They didn't bother to pay you any compensation because they don't care about you. That is how they indoctrinate and brainwash them. They will radicalize them. So if the government is not seen to be caring for the people, not providing compensation to the victims and affected families, the extremists will capitalize on this. They will make this a leverage for further radicalization to get more support from locals. And there could be other scenarios as well. In our security forces, there might be some rogue officers who might conduct fake encounters, who might torture locals for information, for intelligence, who might commit brutalities, human rights violations. See, in India, our forces are very professional, at least largely Indian Army and CAPFs. They are well trained, they understand the constitution, they understand fundamental rights. There is an element of accountability. So, by and large, our security forces are thoroughly professional. But still, in conflict zones, there have been several human rights violations. In Naxal corridor, in Northeast India, in Punjab, in Kashmir, there have been many human rights violations carried out by several rogue officers. They bring a bad name to the entire force. Now imagine a rogue officer has carried out a fake encounter, or he has tortured local villagers, or they've molested the women of the village or raped women as well as part of the conflict. So the whole village will be having resentment against our forces. So in such scenarios, the government has not just to punish the rogue officers, but we should also compensate the victims, or else extremists will capitalize on it. They will further radicalize the people, create more resentment, and increase their recruitment. So that is why providing compensation to victims and affected families is very important. And similarly, having a surrender rehabilitation policy is also very, very important. This is the responsibility of the central government and also the state governments. Because at the end of the day, these are our own people. If they are willing to surrender, lay down their arms and weapons, then they should have an opportunity to come back into the mainstream. That is how peace can be established. That is the best model of conflict resolution. All right? So, those who surrender, if they have not committed heinous crimes, like if they have not been involved in terror attacks or rapes and murders, they can be pardoned by the state. The cases against them can be dropped, and the government can give them some financial support, a job, maybe a house, so that they can come back into mainstream, and this acts as an incentive to pull support from the extremists. You need to incentivize surrender. This is a proven model in conflict resolution. Some of you might think, why should we pardon terrorists? Why should we give them rehabilitation? Why should we pay them money, give them a house or a job? But see, at the end of the day, these are our own citizens. Many of them might have been misled. And the only way to end these conflicts, to defeat such ideologies, is to show that the state is responsible, accountable, and cares for the people. So we have such surrender policies in all the conflict zones, in Kashmir, in Northeast India, and also in the Naxal corridor. If they haven't committed heinous crimes, if they have not been involved in terror attacks, if they haven't killed civilians and security forces, if they have not been major players in the terrorist network, they will be pardoned by the state. Cases will be dropped against them. They'll be brought back into mainstream, given a job, given a house if required, and that is the reason why having a surrender policy is so important. Is that clear? It shows the empathetic side of the state, the human side of the government. So this provides a trust factor to grow between the locals and the government. So all these initiatives are important, and these are some examples with regard to what developmental measures have been taken up in Naxal areas. Now coming to the security approach, coming to the security offensive. See, you can't defeat Naxalism just through development, trust, and goodwill. That is one part of the approach. But still, you have to deal with the hardcore Naxals who are committed to violence against the state, who are committed to the Maoist ideology, which is a violent ideology. Since they have taken up arms against the state, they are calling for a rebellion, a mass rebellion. It is a threat to our integrity and sovereignty. They are committing major attacks against our security forces, targeting government authorities and institutions, even killing civilians as well in the process. So you have to deal with this as a security problem as well. You need to be able to conduct effective offensive operations against these extremists. So India has refined its approach to fight Naxalism. The Home Ministry has set up a dedicated division to fight left-wing extremism. If you visit the MHA's website, as I suggested yesterday, if you go through various departments and divisions of MHA, you will notice that there is a separate division for left-wing extremism. This is the nodal division under the ministry to fight Naxalism in the country. So at an organizational level, the required institutions have been created. The LWE division implements few security related schemes and programs. We are going to take a look at these security schemes as well. There are few schemes implemented by the central government to provide funds and better weapons to our police and armed forces to fight Naxalism. So these security related schemes are implemented by LWE division. It also keeps track of all the developments. Its primary role is to implement certain security schemes like security related expenditure, special infrastructure schemes, special central assistance, etc. I will discuss them later. This builds the capacity of our state police forces and even our central armed police forces. The LWE division decides on the deployment of the CAPFs. to assist the state police forces, because state police alone may not be able to deal with the security operations. State police might be overburdened, they might lack the training, the skills, the weapons. So CAPFs are needed to complement the resources of the state. So deploying the CAPFs in different states is handled by this division. It monitors and keeps a check on the trend. It reviews the security situation. It keeps a constant track of which states, which districts and villages are affected, where attacks are taking place, where the strongholds of Naxals exist. So all the operations are coordinated through this division, the LWE division. It builds coordination with state governments, with various ministries. That is another important role. It works closely with various ministries and departments and also coordinates with state governments. This coordination, monitoring, and implementation of security schemes and even deployment of CAPFs is all taken care of by this division of the Home Ministry. All right. So there could be maybe a prelims question or a small 10-mark mains question asking you about the organizational measures taken by the Home Ministry to fight Naxalism. So that is where you mention these points. The LWE division, its role and functions. It also allocates funds to CAPFs for strengthening its infrastructure, for procuring assets which can help in the operations like helicopters, drones, etc., implementing the civic action program that we discussed earlier. So all these security related measures are handled by the LWE division. Now, let's take a look at the national policy and plan that was introduced in 2015 to fight Naxalism. In 2015, the Modi government introduced a new strategy and a vision to fight Naxalism. It built upon the success of the Manmohan Singh government and launched the National Policy and Action Plan, under which 4 key pillars have been identified in the fight against Naxalism. Under this policy and plan, there is focus on effective security operations, focus on development and welfare, ensuring rights and entitlement of the local communities, and as well as perception management. These are the 4 pillars of this National Policy and Action Plan against Naxalism. One is the security operations, which we are discussing and we are going to cover this. The development measures, which we already covered, along with entitlement of rights and livelihood opportunities. And then we have perception management. What is perception management? It's about managing the media and the information which is being put out in the public domain. See, yesterday I told you that Naxals are very strong in their propaganda. Naxals are very, very strong in their propaganda. They have a good communication infrastructure, right? They're very well organized, and they communicate with the local people, the media, to spread their ideology, to spread their propaganda, and to breed that hatred and resentment against the Indian state. The only way we can counter that propaganda is by launching our own information war. In any conflict, this is a reality. Information war. It is part of psychological warfare operations, psy-war operations. You see this in any conflict. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Israel-Hamas conflict, India-Pakistan conflict. Every side engages in information warfare. They engage in psychological operations. They basically plant stories in the media. They leak certain kind of information to create a positive image for themselves while targeting the enemy. Is that clear? Because what the people perceive, what the world perceives about the conflict will determine the course of the conflict. So if Naxals are propagating resentment against the Indian state and highlighting the failure of the Indian state through their propaganda, we need to counter them by highlighting the success of the Indian state. So psychological war operations or war operations and information warfare is primarily carried out by intelligence agencies. They specialize in information warfare and war operations. So intelligence agencies like IB, Intelligence Bureau, will work closely with other agencies, institutions, and ministries to counter the propaganda of Naxals. So you engage newspapers, TV channels, social media, and internet to convey the right message, to highlight the progress that we are making in governance, to highlight the achievements of the government, and to show the violent ideology of Naxals. So when you engage in a counter propaganda, you can manage the perceptions, which will play a critical role in determining the course of the conflict. Please remember this concept. In any war, in any conflict, information warfare and war operations or psychological warfare operations are extremely critical. Is that clear? Now, for example, in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine has leaked a lot of information to the global media to present Russia in bad light. Western intelligence agencies like the CIA of the United States, they have deliberately leaked a lot of intelligence. Some of it could be true, some of it could be false. They planned these stories in the media to create a negative perception about Russia, to bring global pressure on Russia. Russia does the same as well. Russian intelligence agencies will play with the media. They will engage with the global audience to create a positive perception for Russia while targeting Western countries and Ukraine. This is a part and parcel of any war, any conflict. India, Pakistan have been doing this since 1947. Our respective intelligence agencies, we fight this information war against each other because perception management is crucial in any conflict, in any war. So even in case of internal threats, such as Naxalism, perception management is important. So it's one of the key components of the National Policy and Action Plan, along with the security approach, developmental approach, and ensuring the entitlements and rights are met for the local communities. These are the 4 pillars of the National Policy and Action Plan. So as part of the security approach that we were discussing, the LWE division implements few security related schemes, such as the security related expenditure scheme. There are similar schemes that are implemented as well. You need not know all the details of these schemes. You should just be familiar with them. You should just know the basic details about these schemes. Like SRE scheme, for example, it is mainly focused on modernizing the state police forces. Because as you know, state police forces are outdated. They lack the good training that is needed. They lack motivation. They lack the fitness levels, the skills, and more importantly, they lack modern weaponry. Sometimes Naxals have better weapons and ammunition than your state police forces. So it's very important to improve the capabilities of your state police. Because in all the Naxal affected states, anti-Naxal forces have been constituted. Every state affected by Naxalism has set up an anti-Naxal force, a dedicated anti-Naxal force. But problem is they lack modern weapons, modern communication. They lack protective gear. They lack good training. So to bridge this gap in skills and capabilities, the central government is directly helping these state governments. So through SRE scheme, the center is incentivizing the states to improve the training of the police forces, to procure better weapons, for the police forces, to provide better compensation to the police officers who lay down their lives in the line of duty, to even launch surrender rehabilitation policies at the state level. So any such initiative of the state government, right, it will be reimbursed. The cost will be reimbursed by the central government under this scheme. The center will bear the cost for modernization of police forces at the state level, because states don't have a big budget. They may not have funds for procuring assault rifles, giving us advanced training to their forces, giving them commando level training to engage in guerrilla warfare, right, or to get advanced communication kits and protective gear. They may not have the funds. So states are being encouraged, incentivized. How? Through this scheme, the SRE scheme, the center has promised that if states spend on modernization of police forces and give the bill, center will foot the bill. Center will reimburse that cost. So it's a very, very important scheme to improve the capabilities of our state police forces, which are primarily fighting the Naxals. They have the primary responsibility. So thanks to this scheme, our police forces also have become more modernized. They've been able to get better weapons, better equipment, better training, right? And as well as better resources to fight Naxalism. So that is one important scheme, the security related expenditure scheme, where the center is bearing the cost, reimbursing the state governments. There are many similar schemes that exist. There is special central assistance for 30 most affected districts to fill the critical gaps in public infrastructure, especially which affects the movement of police forces. Because see, connectivity is crucial for mobilizing your security forces. Or else how will you move and deploy your forces to fight Naxals? Imagine in a remote area, in a hilly mountainous area, if there are no roads, no communication, right? No basic facilities. How can the police forces and security forces fight the Naxals? Their deployment, movement will be affected. So creating critical public infrastructure of an emergent nature to fill the gaps so that it improves connectivity and mobility for the forces is a priority under this scheme. Special funds are given by the center to create such infrastructure in the 30 most affected districts. Then you have special infrastructure scheme, which is another scheme of the central government, through which funds are given for fortifying police stations and bases of security forces. Because see, Naxals mainly target police stations. They target the security camps of security forces. So it's important to fortify them, to create high walls, strong boundary walls, to use technology as well, like barrier gates, CCTV cameras, watchtowers. So such infrastructure will have to be created. Technology has to be brought in to fortify the police stations and the security camps. So for that, special funds are given by the center. There is separate initiative for this as well, for fortifying police stations. So hundreds of police stations have been funded by the center through these schemes to protect the police forces and ensure that the Naxals are not able to easily attack the police stations and police forces. So all these schemes I mentioned, including civic action program, they are implemented by the left-wing extremism division. It is the LWE division of Home Ministry that provides funds for all these security related expenses. Understood? Any other assistance needed, like for example, procuring helicopters, because helicopters can play a critical role in a conflict. It acts as a force multiplier, right? For further strengthening any infrastructure needed for the police and security forces. All the required assistance is given by the central government. A well thought out media plan is also in place to manage perceptions, to wage the information war that I was talking about, to counter and defeat the Naxal ideology and Naxal propaganda. There is a well thought out media plan being implemented by the center by working closely with the state governments. So all media outlets are engaged: radio, newspapers, television, even social media and internet. Through such engagement, the false propaganda of Naxals is being countered. The benefits of democracy is being promoted. The achievements of the government, progress of welfare schemes is being promoted. So this is the broad strategy that we are following. There is a road requirement plan which funds road construction in the Naxal affected areas. Few specific districts have been chosen in the Naxal affected states where road creation is being funded by the center. State level roads, district and village roads are being funded by the center. Mobile connectivity, as I mentioned earlier, is being improved in Naxal affected areas, again with central support. Through the Universal Service Obligation Fund, special allocations are being made for Naxal areas because it will not only benefit the local economy, it will benefit our security forces as well. Security forces also need good communication to be able to deploy, plan, and execute their operations. They will have to be in touch with many stakeholders. So, good communication is needed. So, special support is given from the center for providing mobile connectivity. You would have heard about Aspirational Districts program launched by the Modi government. The most backward districts of the country have been identified under Aspirational Districts program, out of which 35 of them are severely affected by Naxalism. Out of all the aspirational districts classified by the government of India, 35 of them are Naxal affected districts. They are the most affected. So through aspirational districts program, better welfare is being provided, better governance is being delivered, which aids the security operations on the ground. So broadly, these are the various developmental welfare initiatives and security related schemes that are being implemented in Naxal areas. Understood? If you can remember some of these points at least and present that in an answer, that is more than enough. Now, coming to the last part of this topic, what kind of security operations are we conducting? Now we are looking at the nature of security operations. Till now, we were talking about organizational structure, we were discussing the funds, we were discussing modernization of our forces and security related schemes. Now we will talk about the operations, the tactics, the strategies being used by various forces. Which forces are involved, which agencies are involved in this fight? That is something you should be familiar with. The Home Ministry has designated CRPF as the primary anti-Naxal force of the center. See, the CRPF, which is one of the central armed police forces, it mainly deals with any kind of internal security situation. Like, for example, it is also deployed in Jammu and Kashmir to assist Indian Army in counterinsurgency operations and also to maintain law and order in Kashmir, to deal with riots, to manage mobs in Kashmir. CRPF is deployed in an internal security role. It also plays a role in disaster management, in providing security for elections, etc. So CRPF has been designated by the MHA as the primary anti-Naxal force of the center to assist the state police forces. So Home Ministry has deployed CRPF battalions across the Naxal states, the Naxal affected states. And CRPF has raised an elite special force. A dedicated commando force has been raised by CRPF called Cobra. Cobra stands for Commando Battalion for Resolute Action. This special force unit of CRPF, which is a commando unit, specializes in guerrilla warfare. These commandos of CRPF are highly trained in jungle warfare tactics. right? You have to fight a thorn with a thorn. If Naxals are engaging in jungle warfare, you need similar strategies. You can't deploy regular forces. They will not have the training, the motivation, and skills to engage in such a fight in jungles and in forested areas. You need you need a dedicated special force unit. Special forces, they are elite forces comprising of highly trained commandos who have very high motivation. They are given better training, better equipment and weapons with better incentives to operate very effectively in a conflict zone. So CRPF has raised this elite commando unit called Cobra, Commando Battalion for Resolute Action, which engages in guerrilla war while conducting coin operations against the Maoists. It leads the counterinsurgency operations with the state police forces. They work in coordination. Every state police has raised its own anti-Naxal force. So they work with CRPF very closely to conduct these joint counterinsurgency operations. The Cobra Battalion has received training, highly intensive commando training from the Indian Army. This is where Indian Army is involved. Remember, I told you that government of India, subsequent governments have decided to not use armed forces against Naxals, to not cause excessive damage. So since Indian Army is not directly deployed in a conflict, they are playing an indirect role. The Indian Army is involved in training these special forces which are fighting Naxals. Indian Army has dedicated commando training schools, jungle warfare schools. So the CRPF commandos from Cobra Battalion are trained by Indian Army. They receive elite training from Indian Army commandos. They have been given specialized weapons with better protective gear, with better equipment and communication kits. So they are more effective in their fight against Naxals. They have modern assault rifles. We have procured AK-47s, the Trevor assault rifles from Israel, right? These are used by special forces around the world. Advanced pistols like the Glock pistols. They have very specialized clothing as well, which is cut resistant, heat resistant. They get elbow caps, knee caps to prevent injuries. They get highly advanced body armor, which is light but effective in protecting the core organs. They get advanced night vision goggles, GPS navigation kits, better communication equipment. So all such facilities, resources are given for such commando units. That's why they are special forces. So with their advanced training, advanced capabilities and resources, they can be very effective in targeted operations. Is that clear? So the Manmohan Singh government launched a major offensive operation, which is unofficially known as Operation Green Hunt. After we saw the revival in Naxalism in 2004 to 2007 period, Manmohan Singh designated Naxalism as our biggest internal threat. So as part of the new strategy and new operations that India started carrying out, a covert operation was conducted across the forests and jungles of India, which is officially denied by the government of India. Officially, there is nothing called Operation Green Hunt. Government of India denies having conducted this operation. Is that clear? Because it was a covert operation. The CRPF commandos with state police, with support of intelligence agencies, they conducted targeted operations lasting 3 years from 2009 to 2012 across Naxal affected states. Targeted operations were conducted in the forests and jungles, and these operations are denied by the government. It's been widely reported in the media. It's the media which has given the name Operation Green Hunt. Government denies its existence. So the officially does not exist. It never happened. But in the world of security, covert operations are a reality. Is that clear? Of course, government will not acknowledge it. They are meant to remain secret. They are meant to be classified operations which the government will never acknowledge, right? Especially when you're hunting top leaders, if you're looking to eliminate them, right? There are chances you might violate the law of the land. There are chances you might give advanced information to these extremists. So sometimes secrecy is important. So in the world of security, be it internal or external operations, we do conduct covert operations. Any country which is looking after its security will be engaged in covert classified operations. Governments will never speak about it, they'll never acknowledge it. We can only determine them based on investigative reports, media reports, and other credible sources. So, Operation Green Hunt was one such classified counterinsurgency operation that was carried out across multiple states, through which targeted hits were carried out to eliminate few top and mid-level leaders of CPI Maoist. Is that clear? It lasted for approximately 3 years. And there were a lot of allegations of human rights violations as well. That was one more reason why the government did not acknowledge the operation. But experts point out and former officers point out that Operation Green Hunt was very effective. It played a critical role in weakening the CPI Maoist. At the right time, when it was staging a revival, India hit the CPI Maoist with deadly impact. And this played a role in weakening the movement from 2012 onwards. Is that clear? Then if you look at your state police forces, the Andhra Pradesh police, they stand out as an example. I told you earlier that Andhra police, they saw tremendous success against the People's War Group in 1980s, 1990s. They almost wiped out the PWG. I told you that they adopted a unique strategy to fight the Naxals. In fact, this success of Andhra police back in 80s and 90s, it is still studied as a case study in India and around the world by security forces. Several special forces around the world in foreign countries which are engaged in counterinsurgency operations, they study the case of Andhra Pradesh police, how they fought against PWG. Even in India, in NSG training, even for IPS probationers at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel National Police Academy, the success of Andhra police is taught as a case study. So what did they do? That is something you should know. What was this unique strategy they followed? How come they almost wiped out PWG? Within few years, Andhra police, they were very close to wiping out Naxalism in the Andhra Pradesh Telangana region. So how come they achieved this success? What was this new strategy they followed? Let me explain. The Andhra police, they raised a special force unit called Greyhounds. Today, it has been divided between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana because obviously Andhra Pradesh was bifurcated. The Greyhounds was one of the initial special forces raised in India by a police organization. See, usually special forces exist with armed forces like Indian Army, Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, or maybe with central armed police forces like CRPF. No state police in India had a special force. The first state police in India to raise a special force was Andhra Pradesh police. They raised an elite unit of commandos called the Greyhounds. And it's not just about a commando unit. Just one commando unit will not make the difference. It is the strategy they followed. The top IPS officers at that time who headed Andhra Pradesh police from the DGP to the mid-senior levels, they strategized that outside forces can never be effective in this war against Naxals. Because eventually, who are the Naxals? Naxals are farmers, tribals. They are from local areas. They are part of the forest, the mountains. So if you're bringing forces from other states, other places in the country, they will never understand the local geography. They will not speak the local language, the tribal language. They will not understand tribal customs. They will not be sensitive to the tribal community. And more importantly, outside forces will never have the right motivation to fight the war, to defeat the ideology. This is a very important lesson in counterinsurgency. When you're fighting a protracted war, you need highly motivated soldiers to fight this conflict. They should have a personal motivation, a strong incentive. So, what Andhra Pradesh police did was they prioritized local recruits. Now, see, if you're bringing a anti-Naxal force of the state police, it will have officers from all districts of the state, districts which are not even affected by Naxalism. So, a constable or a inspector who is from a faraway district, how can he be motivated to fight Naxalism when he's not connected to it? Let's say a force like CRPF is brought in by the center. The Jawans, the officers, they will come from Karnataka, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, and they are sent to Odisha or Chhattisgarh to fight. They will not understand the local geography. They'll not understand the tribal language, the customs. They can't generate local support. They can't create local intelligence network. And they will not have the motivation, the personal. See, we're not questioning their professionalism. It's just that the personal motivation will be missing. But imagine if a local youth whose life and family has been destroyed by these extremists, by the extremism, if you recruit this person, give them training, give them incentives, give them the right resources, they will any day have a better motivation, a better incentive to fight this war. Ideological wars cannot be won just by force. You need good strategies, you need good tactics, and that is what Andhra Pradesh police did. They recruited the local youth from the same tribal areas, especially those who were affected by Naxalism, those for whom education was ruined because of Naxalism. Their life, their family was ruined because of Naxalism. So such local youth were prioritized in recruitment. They were given highly specialized training by sending them to the commando training schools of the Indian Army. The Indian Army trained the Greyhound commandos. Andhra government allocated additional funds for procuring modern weapons, better vehicles which could withstand the blast impact, better protective gear was given, and more importantly, better compensation. They were given higher salaries. This is very important. The money plays a big role. They are risking their lives for the country. And I am sure you know what salaries our Jawans and police officers draw. It is peanuts. So to motivate them, the salaries were increased, the compensation was increased for Greyhound commandos. They were given houses so that they are at least sure that their family is safe, their family gets a better life. So through all these measures, the Andhra Pradesh police saw a tremendous success against PWG. That is why this became a case study in India and around the world. Many special forces, police officers, they study the success of Greyhounds even today. If you clear the exam, if you become an IPS officer at the National Police Academy in Hyderabad, you will have a course on Naxalism, how India has fought against it, and you will study the example of Greyhounds with specific details of how the Greyhounds was raised, how they saw this success in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. In the Eastern Ghats, they fought a jungle war. They built local intelligence networks. They worked with local tribal communities because they were related to them. They could speak the tribal language. They created local informants who gave them the intelligence based on which they targeted the leaders of PWG. They broke their network, broke their finances, and within years, they had almost wiped out the PWG. So PWG members ran away from Andhra Pradesh and took shelter in Chhattisgarh and Odisha. And later, they tied up with MCCI to form CPI Maoist. Is that clear? So today, based on the success of Andhra Pradesh, other states also have raised their own special force units. Like Chhattisgarh has raised a commando unit called Black Panther that specializes in commando operations. It's modeled on the Greyhounds. Odisha also has raised a similar special force that specializes in guerrilla warfare. So the idea is very simple. Recruit local youth who are highly motivated, give them better incentives, give them better training, better weapons, get them trained by the Indian Army, and deploy them in these operations. So this strategy has given better results. If they are supported by CRPF, by Cobra commandos, then automatically we will see success in these operations. So along with these security forces, you need good intelligence, you need good logistical support. This is where Indian Air Force and Intelligence Bureau and NTRO come into the picture. These central agencies and forces also play a key role. Indian Air Force is involved in this war against Naxalism. But again, it's an indirect support. Indian Air Force can only provide logistical support. Is that clear? Just like Indian Army can only provide training. Indian Army is not directly involved in these operations. There is no direct conflict between Indian Army and Naxals. Right? We have decided not to use armed forces because they will cause more damage. So they are providing indirect support. Indian Army is providing training. Indian Air Force is providing logistical support. Indian Army has deployed helicopters which are used by CRPF and state police forces and commando units for their deployment. So this acts as a force multiplier. It improves the resources of our forces. They can deploy quickly, right? If required, they can send reinforcements. They can carry out casualty evacuation. When an encounter is happening in a forest area, if our forces are getting injured, right, before they lose their life, helicopters can swoop in and pull out the injured personnel so that they can receive treatment, so that lives can be saved. And if one party is trapped in an ambush attack, we can send reinforcements quickly through helicopters. So for such logistical support, Indian Air Force has deployed helicopters. But Indian Air Force cannot open fire. It can't target Naxals through these helicopters. So offensive operations are not allowed. It's a non-combat role. Please make a note of this. Both Indian Army and Indian Air Force, they are deployed here in a non-combat role. They are assisting in training, logistical support, etc. Only if the helicopter comes under attack, only if when Naxals open fire, because they have RPGs, they have rocket-propelled grenades, if they directly target the helicopter, only then the Garud commandos of Indian Air Force can defend the helicopter. Only in defense. They can't conduct any kind of offensive strike. It's only meant for logistics, for transportation. All right? Be very clear about this. On this helicopter, there will be 2 Garud commandos who are from Indian Air Force. They can't engage in an offensive fight against Naxals. Their mandate is very clear. If the helicopter is itself coming under attack, if Naxals are looking to bring down the helicopter by opening fire or by launching a RPG, then the Garud commandos will engage them in defense to protect the helicopter. So it's a defensive role. It's a non-combat role. All right? Then you have our intelligence agencies playing a critical role in this war. The IB is responsible for domestic intelligence within India. So the IB, the Intelligence Bureau, collects ground level intelligence. It maintains human assets to generate human intelligence. This is indispensable in the world of intelligence operations. Human assets means you need to have an agent inside these extremist groups. You need to infiltrate them. You need to either cultivate a Naxal to work for us, to inform us, or we should plant our officer secretly into their units. Essentially create a double agent who works for them, works for us as well. These human assets are critical in the world of intelligence as they can provide very reliable, accurate, actionable intelligence. Along with such classified covert operations, the IB also conducts technical surveillance, that is electronic interception. It generates technical intelligence, mainly by intercepting communication. IB has the ability to intercept communication. It works with the state IBs. See, the central IB has its own network of intelligence gathering apparatus. State police will also have their state IBs. State police will also have their state intelligence bureaus. So they work in close coordination. The IB will have its own field offices across the country, but they will have to work with the state IBs as well, which are under the state police. So they generate valuable human intelligence and technical intelligence. We also have NTRO, the National Technical Research Organization, which is our premier technical intelligence agency. It was initially established under RAW. After the Kargil War, there were many gaps in our intelligence collection. So as part of the security reforms that we introduced, a technical intelligence agency was created called NTRO, National Technical Research Organization. For many years, it was functioning under RAW. RAW is our foreign intelligence agency. If IB is looking after domestic intelligence, RAW looks after external intelligence, foreign intelligence. So under RAW, NTRO was functioning as its technical intelligence wing. But recently, NTRO has been separated from RAW. Today, it is a separate intelligence agency of its own, reporting directly to the National Security Advisor. It has been brought out of RAW, and today it has become a premier elite technical intelligence agency of India. NTRO can intercept all kinds of electronic communication, from mobile phone calls to text messages to emails to various communication applications. In fact, the whole internet, even satellite communications, everything can be intercepted by NTRO. That is the capability it has. The IAF also deploys drones for surveillance. India is effectively using drones for surveillance. Our intelligence agencies and security forces, they all are using drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, to carry out surveillance, to look out for Naxal movement and generate intelligence, which is helping these targeted operations. Is that clear? So you need to be familiar with all these measures that have been taken. Got it? The role of CRPF, the role of state police and the special forces, the role of intelligence agencies, the role of Indian Army and Indian Air Force. That is something you should be familiar with. So now we come to the fag end of this chapter, the last section. I want to discuss about the Samadhan doctrine. I'll just take you through this doctrine. We'll discuss the targets of Naxals. What do they target? And how are they raising funds for their operations? We have to discuss their finances and their targets. We'll also look at the human rights situation here in the Naxal corridor. And that basically completes our chapter. Recently, the Home Ministry launched a doctrine called Samadhan Doctrine in 2017. It's actually an acronym, meaning every letter stands for something. It can be expanded. This is a vision that has been laid down by the central government for state governments and also for our security forces. This is the vision that is guiding our fight against Naxalism. See, in 2015, we brought out a national policy and action plan that provides the strategies. Through Samadhan doctrine, the vision has been laid out. Like what should be the priorities for the state government and the security forces. So S stands for smart leadership. Smart leadership by the state governments and state police. Because at the end of the day, fighting Naxalism is the primary responsibility of the state police. Right? So state governments have to show that leadership. State police have to display that leadership. They have to take ownership of the anti-Naxal operations. So S for smart leadership. A for aggressive strategy. To be aggressive in security operations. Instead of being defensive and on the back foot, the security forces and the intelligence agencies are urged to be proactive, to use any asset needed to adopt an aggressive strategy in fighting Naxals. So that is why the last 15 years have been good for India, especially from 2007, 2009. From that period onwards, we have increased our intelligence led operations. Intelligence agencies are generating actionable intelligence on which they can act. They're generating specific location of Naxal camps, Naxal leaders, based on which our forces are conducting targeted operations. Instead of conducting blind operations in the forests, which will not give good results, it's always better to conduct intelligence led operations. So, based on real time intelligence, such accurate precision operations are being carried out in the last 15 plus years. So, that's why CRPF and state forces have seen better success. Is that clear? So, A for aggressive strategy, to be as aggressive as possible, to get any resource needed and to not be on the back foot. M for motivation and training, to get advanced training from Indian Army if required, to raise special forces like the Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh, to ensure that the soldiers who are fighting this war at the forefront, they are highly motivated and they've got the best training in guerrilla warfare. So M for motivation and training. A for actionable intelligence, which I was just mentioning. Actionable intelligence means real time, accurate intelligence based on which you can take action. Because see, intelligence sometimes can be very vague. Vague intelligence is useless, right? Intelligence agencies, they receive thousands of inputs every day from technical sources and human sources. But they need accurate information, specific information. If they're planning an attack, we should know who are part of the attack, right? Who are the core members involved in the planning? What is the target? When will they carry out the attack? Those specific details, if you get it in real time, then such intelligence becomes actionable. You can act upon it, right? So the focus is to generate actionable intelligence. The special forces and intelligence agencies, they're all involved in generating actionable intelligence. So there is a need to share this information between different states, between center and states. That is also a key part of the coordination that has to be achieved. Then D for dashboard based KPIs and KRAs. This is for monitoring our progress. If any of you have ever worked in a corporate setup, in a private company, or even today in government organizations, you will know what KPIs and KRAs are. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. KRA stands for Key Result Areas. All right? Essentially, you can track your progress by identifying the key indicators and result areas. Like, for example, you guys are preparing for UPSC exams. That is your goal, to crack this exam. So, as part of your preparation, if you have to monitor where you stand, you need a feedback. If you want to know where you stand, if you want to change your course of preparation, you need a feedback. To generate that valuable feedback, you have to monitor your KRAs and KPIs. For example, your performance indicator. Are you attending all the classes? That is one indicator. What is your attendance? Are you reading newspaper daily? Another indicator. That's another KPI. Are you revising every day? That is another KPI. So like this, you can identify certain KPIs, key performance indicators, and you have to update the data every day. You have to update this on a wall, on a chart or a sheet, which is nothing but the dashboard. In your car, there is a dashboard, correct? Behind your steering wheel, we call that a dashboard because the car's performance and result areas are being displayed on the dashboard. The moment you look at it, you get to know how your car is performing. That is the purpose of a dashboard. In the case of companies and government organizations, a dashboard is a large screen, usually large LED screens or TV screens that are put up on a wall where all the KPIs, KRAs are displayed. So that the moment you look at the wall, you get to know where we stand. You get that feedback regarding your progress. So for your preparation, you can just put up a chart on a wall, which is the dashboard. You can just create a chart for yourself and list the KPIs and update it every day. Are you attending all the classes, reading newspaper every day, revising every week? That is your KPI. What is your KRA, your result area? What is your score in your weekly test? How are you performing in the test series? Right? Are you writing answers? What is the score you're getting? That is your KRA, the result area. The moment you project this data on the chart, that becomes your dashboard. In your car as well, what do you see on the dashboard? You see the speed of your car, you see the fuel level, the temperature, the time, the kilometers that the car has run, the RPM. These are nothing but KPIs and KRAs of your car. The moment you look at the dashboard, you get to know how your car is performing. Similarly, you create a chart for your preparation. You track your KPIs, KRAs, you get to know where you stand in this exam. That gives you the feedback. So if you realize that you're not reading newspapers enough, you're not revising enough, based on this feedback, you can carry out a course correction. You can correct your course of preparation. You can pay more attention to the weaker areas. That is the purpose of dashboard-based tracking. Now, this is a common feature in the corporate world. Almost every private company follows this. They have KPIs and KRAs to track employee performance, team performance, to see whether organization is achieving the goals, and everything is displayed on a wall on these large TV screens. Same is being followed by government institutions as well. Several ministries, government departments, security forces, even they use the dashboard format. So under Samadhan doctrine, government is calling for performance tracking, like how many Naxal affected districts are present, how many Naxal attacks have taken place, how many Naxals have been killed, how many civilians have been killed, what is the funds we have spent, how many security forces have been killed and injured. These are the KPIs and KRAs. So they're all being tracked in real time, being updated on a dashboard so that all stakeholders know that where we stand. They know the progress, they are getting a feedback based on which the leaders, the top officials can make a course correction. So this has become an integral part of government planning and even in security operations as well. Then H for harnessing technology, using modern technology as a force multiplier, using drones, using GPS navigation, thermal imaging devices, night vision goggles, so that even night operations can be carried out in the dark, deploying satellites, the military satellites that we have, the Earth observation satellites that we have, like RISAT, Cartosat, etc. They can give you very high resolution pictures, right? Today, it has become an integral part of surveillance and intelligence gathering. So deploying satellites for generating satellite imagery, satellite intelligence. Then putting trackers in weapons, because Naxals, they steal weapons from our forces. That is one way through which Naxals are raising weapons. They attack police stations not just to kill police officers, but to steal weapons from the police armory. to steal the guns from our security forces. Now, what if we put a tracker in it? The moment they steal and run, we know where they are. So, deploying such technology to make your operations better and effective. Then, A for action plan for each theater. Meaning, apart from the national plan, there should be a district level plan, a state-wise plan. That's what you mean, action plan for every theater, because the challenges are different from state to state, district to district. So the concerned authorities have to customize the plan, the security plan, right? For every district, for every forest area, for every state, depending on the theater. Theater is nothing but the region, the geographical area. So for every geographical area, for every state, every district, separate action plan should be formed depending on local circumstances. And finally, N for no access to financing. Cut off the financing of Naxals. Because see, any war, it's about money, it's about business. Be it war between two countries or even conflicts with insurgents and terrorists. Once you cut off the money supply, you bring the war to an end. Is that clear? War is always about money. The business side of it plays a critical role in driving the conflict. You want to trigger a conflict, you focus on the money aspect. You want to end a conflict, you end the financing route. So you need to tackle money laundering. You need to tackle organized crime, which is a source of funding for such extremist terrorist groups. So N for no access to financing. So these are the priorities laid out under the Samadhan doctrine. This defines the vision of our security operations, which we are leading today under the National Action Policy and Plan against the Naxals. Is that clear? So now we have few more minutes left. I would like to discuss one last point, a very important and interesting point. Now, from where are the Naxals raising arms and weapons? How are they procuring it? This could come as a question. UPSC can ask you, what are the sourcing, what are the routes through which Naxals are raising funds and weapons for their insurgency against India, for their rebellion against India? You should know how they are procuring arms and weapons, and you should know their routes of financing. You should also know what are they targeting. What are the targets of Naxals? What do they attack? Naxals, since they are fighting the state, their goal is to capture state power. They will target anything that represents the government. So obviously they'll target police and security forces. That is their primary target. As police and security forces represent the state and they are fighting them, they are the primary target. So they'll attack police stations, the security camps. They will target the convoys of police and security forces that are moving around. They'll try to kill as many policemen and security personnel as possible. They'll attack government authorities, government officials, especially the administrative officials, the local panchayat officials, even the local state bureaucracy, right? Even IAS officers have been attacked, right? There have been many cases of kidnapping, torture, and even death with regard to government officers and government officials. They attack government buildings, any building of a government department or the panchayat buildings. They don't even spare schools, government schools, water tanks. They target public infrastructure, any infrastructure created by the government. They destroy new roads. If government builds a road, they destroy the road. This shows the hollow ideology of Naxals. They are claiming that they are fighting due to lack of development. If government is providing development, then why are they targeting it? They destroy mobile towers. They destroy school infrastructure. They destroy water tanks. Now, if they are truly bothered about the development of tribals, farmers, and peasants, why would they destroy government infrastructure? That clearly shows that the Naxal agenda is a hollow agenda. It's a selfish political agenda. They are least bothered about development and governance. They are simply using the lack of development as an excuse to brainwash the people and get support for their ideology, which is to fight a war to throw the state and capture state power. So whenever government makes some progress and reaches out to these areas, they try to destroy that. They try to break the links between government and local people by targeting the infrastructure. So these are the primary targets of Naxals. The police and security forces, government authorities, government buildings, government infrastructure. They even disrupt elections. They don't allow elections to be held. They target election officials. They target people who go and vote. They target the officials. They target voters as well. And they target the representatives, those who stand for elections, especially at the local level, at the panchayat level. They'll target the panchayat leaders, the local political representatives. They become the target of Naxals as they represent the state. They even target private companies and industries as well. All right? As they oppose the industries, the private enterprises, they target them as well. They are also known to target the local civilians. They target local civilians as well if they believe them to be police informants. If they believe that some local is working for the police, passing information, or let's say there are locals who don't support the Naxals. Let's say local people, they refuse to give support to Naxals. They don't give them funds or shelter, right? If such things happen, they'll target local civilians as well. So these are the primary targets of Naxals. Now, how are they raising funds? How did they sustain this movement for almost 60 plus years? They mainly resort to organized crime. That is their primary source of funding. They rely on extortion. Like criminal gangs, they extort money. They threaten local industrialists, businessmen, local politicians, etc. If they don't pay a ransom, they will attack them. They will kidnap them. They might kill their family members. They might kill that person itself. This is how underworld gangs operate, criminal gangs. That is exactly how Naxals operate as well. Extortion has become big business for them, right? They threaten the local shops, businesses, factories, industrialists, owners. They threaten local politicians, the MPs, MLAs, and political leaders because they know they have money. They've all been involved in corruption. They have crores of rupees with them. So they extort money from them. They threaten them. They have to pay monthly haftas or ransom, or else they will target them. This is one big source of funding. Other than that, they get involved in drug production and trafficking. Every extremist group does this. Insurgents and terrorists, they are known to get involved in drug production and drug trafficking because this brings big money for them. They grow drugs in the areas they control, especially opium. In the forested belt, they grow opium. They encourage local farmers as well to grow opium, right? Because see, this serves two purposes for them. They can traffic and smuggle the drugs and narcotics to raise funds for their operations. That will bring a lot of money. And also, don't forget, drugs are addictive. It's an addiction. They will use this to indoctrinate the youth. Several extremist, terrorist, insurgent groups have done this. The local youths that they recruit, their cadres, their members, they get them addicted to drugs, because drug addiction has a huge impact, not just a physical impact, but a psychological, emotional impact. They become numb to pain. They lose their sensitivity. They lose their emotional touch. They become like machines. Drug addicts become like machines. They don't feel the emotions, the empathy. And it becomes easier for these radicals and extremists to brainwash such people, to indoctrinate them. You will see this in Punjab as well. We'll discuss Khalistan movement later. In Khalistan movement as well, the Khalistani extremists, they indoctrinated the youth. They brought drugs from Afghanistan with the help of Pakistan, and drugs played a critical role in fueling the Khalistan movement. In Northeast India, several insurgent groups, they get involved in drug production, drug smuggling, because that not only brings money for them, but they get the cadres and members addicted, so that it's easy to brainwash and radicalize the youth and use them as machines for their war against India. So this is another big source. They get involved in such criminal activities. They get involved in smuggling. They tie up with other organized criminal cartels. They work with criminal organizations to smuggle drugs and other illegal material through which they make money. And because of this, they will build contacts with arms traffickers. Through this, they will build contacts with arms traffickers and procure modern weapons from them. They will use this money and these contacts. They will work with other insurgents and terror groups, as I mentioned. Naxals had ties with LTTE, Northeast insurgents, Lashkar-e-Toiba, etc. So through all these contacts with criminal organizations and terror and insurgent groups, they will procure modern weapons, advanced weaponry from the global arms trafficking market. They also attack police stations. They steal weapons from the police and security forces. This is another major route for getting hold of advanced weaponry. When they carry out these ambush attacks, kill an entire convoy of police officers and security personnel, they loot the weapons that are left behind, because state forces will have better weaponry. They'll steal the guns, the pistols, assault rifles, grenades, even their walkie-talkies and communication kits. They attack armories, security base camps, because they know that weapons are stored in police stations and in security base camps. That is why they attack state armories. They loot and steal from the government forces itself, which is another major route through which they're procuring advanced weaponry. Then they rely on local illegal gun factories to procure country guns, especially in UP, Bihar, and Nepal, and along the Terai belt, the borders of UP, Bihar, and Nepal. There are many illegal gun making factories, local gun making factories. This is connected to the criminal gangs in UP and Bihar. These guns don't even function properly. Many times they backfire. All right, if you have seen Mirzapur, right, you would know what I'm talking about. The gun culture that exists in UP and Bihar, the criminal gangs that exist here, right? They operate many illegal gun factories. They produce guns to mainly threaten their rivals, to extort money, etc. So Naxals also rely on them. They pay these criminal gangs and gun factories and procure local country guns as well. So these are the different sources through which they're raising advanced weapons, arms, including some local weapons. So they'll tie up with other terror and insurgent groups, arms traffickers, to get modern weapons from outside of India, from global arms trafficking markets. They'll steal weapons from police and security forces. They'll also get these local country guns. So apart from this, for financing, they rely on donations as well. from certain sympathizers. There might be Naxal sympathizers in cities, in other parts of the country, right? There might be well educated people who are sympathizing with Naxal cause and ideology. They themselves don't want to fight, but they might contribute funds, contribute donations. And of course, the foreign angle was also there. China, Pakistan to an extent, which have also provided donations to the Naxal movement, they've tried to fund the Naxal movement in India. So this is something that you should be familiar with. Is that clear? You should know what they target. You should know how they raise arms and weapons. You should know what are their routes of financing. So for today, this is more than enough. We are left with the last point, the human rights situation. We can pick it up tomorrow. Not a problem. We'll close this chapter tomorrow. It will only take few more minutes, and I'll take you through some previous questions. I'll take you through some previous exam questions that have come in mains. We'll discuss a couple of them, and this will complete this entire chapter. So tomorrow we'll be starting with the next module on terrorism. Got it? So just give me a couple of minutes. I'll take a quick look at your doubts, and after that we can close the session for today. Unfortunately, today, because of the technical interruption, we lost a good 15-20 minutes, or else we could have closed this chapter by today itself. So just bear with me for 5 minutes. We'll just extend the session by 5 more minutes. I'll answer all your questions and we can close for the day. Kishan is asking, what is a liberated zone? Liberated zone is an area where the extremists have taken over, meaning they have removed the government presence. They have driven out police forces, security forces, and government authorities, and they claim to have taken over the administration of that liberated area. So they call that a liberated zone. Shyam is asking, is there any foreign terrorist or extremist involvement in sponsoring Naxals? Did they take help of foreign terrorists like Khalistan terrorists, Pakistan's ISI, etc.? I discussed this point, so I don't think I have to repeat this. Shyam is asking one more question. What is the reason for presence of Naxals in Andhra Pradesh? See, in Andhra Pradesh, which includes today's Telangana as well, in the forested areas of Eastern Ghats, several tribal communities were affected due to poor development. Then farmers and landless laborers and peasants were affected by poor governance. That is what created the base for Naxalism in Andhra Pradesh. Mega is asking, why don't they come to the forefront? If you mean, why don't they enter politics? Why don't they approach the media and the judiciary for justice? It's because Naxals don't believe in that route. That's why I explained the Maoist ideology. What did Mao Zedong advocate? He advocated that using violence is the only approach to get justice. Under Maoism, violence is non-negotiable. There's no other route. There's no question of coming to the forefront, to the mainstream. The only route under Maoism is to fight an armed rebellion, to throw the state and capture state power. That is why their ideology is not acceptable. Atharva is asking, are separatists and Naxalites different? Separatist is a general term who are seeking to separate a particular region from India. Naxals, in a way, you can say that they are separatists, but Naxals are, technically speaking, as I told you, insurgents who have been labeled as terrorists by India, because they are looking to throw the Indian government out. Now, see, for example, Khalistan extremists can be called separatists. They are looking to break only Punjab away from India. Northeast insurgents are looking to break only few parts away from India. That is called separatism. Kashmiri separatists, Naga separatists, those who are looking to break away only one part of the country, they are called separatists. Naxals, they have a country-wide ideology. Their dream is to throw the Indian state itself out of power and capture power for themselves. So Naxals are insurgents who are officially notified as terrorists, but to call them separatists, it would be slightly incorrect. It wouldn't be the exactly the right term to use. Anjali is asking, IAS take care of police. I didn't say IAS takes care of police. I told you that in a district administration at the district level, the district police, they report to the IAS, to the district commissioner. Why? Because law and order is under the district commissioner or the district collector, deputy commissioner, district magistrate, whatever you call it. The role changes from state to state. So at the district level, the DC or DM has control over law and order. So even the SP who heads the district police in a way has to report to the DC or DM. So doesn't mean the DC or DM takes care of the police force. No, the SP is responsible for the police force, but only for law and order matters to monitor the overall law and order situation. DC or DM have powers over district police. Vedashri is asking, it's always seen that non-state actors from different regions and countries have connections despite being from different geography, as you mentioned. Naxals have connections with Lashkar LTT. How is that possible? How these connections are not broken by state actors? See, these insurgent and terror groups, they operate covertly. They will develop secret links. They will send out emissaries to meet the other side. Like Naxals reached out to LTT. They sent their members to Sri Lanka to develop contacts with LTT so they can team up together. They can jointly, raise funds and share weapons as well to lead their respective wars. So it's quite common to form such alliances. And if you ask why state actors have not broken the connection, of course we have tried. And that's why we succeeded. Today, Naxals have very limited foreign contact, foreign support. It's because India succeeded in breaking those connections. Be it the support from China, support from Pakistan, contact that Naxals had with other terror groups. India played a role in breaking those connections. Janvi is asking, sir, regarding the new amendment to Forest Conservation Act, there were some opinions regarding curbing forest rights. Can we say it might have an unfavorable impact on Naxalism? You are absolutely right. The new amendment to the Forest Conservation Act, it poses a threat to forest rights. The Forest Rights Act is being threatened by it. You might have read about this in newspapers, in current affairs. The proposed changes to Forest Conservation Act will make it easier for the government to take over forest land and give it to private industries, to turn forest land for non-forest purposes. So there is indeed a concern there that if tribal rights, forest rights are again affected, then it might create more support for Naxalism. That concern is definitely true. Kishan is asking, sir, why armed forces come under AFSPA for alleged human rights violations? Has AFSPA any relevance these days? Don't worry, I'll discuss this in a later class. We have many more topics to cover. AFSPA will be covered. It's very important. We will discuss AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It's not relevant here because Naxal areas is not under AFSPA. That's why I didn't mention that here. It's not needed here. But when we come to Northeast India, when we come to Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, their AFSPA has been implemented, right? So in the coming chapters, we will discuss AFSPA. All right. So guys, these are the questions. So yeah, with this, we can bring today's session to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session. Do let me know how it went. Tomorrow, we just have one last topic. As I told you, we could have finished everything if not for that technical delay where we lost a good 15-20 minutes. So let's come back tomorrow, wrap it up, and head to the next module on terrorism. Do let me know how the class went. I hope you guys are liking it. I hope the class is interesting. So I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.